Bonnie Christine Craig was born in Calgary, Alberta, Canada on March 30th, 1976. At the age of 3, Bonnie's father was replaced by her stepfather, Gary Campbell, for her and her older brother. He adored the children, and soon Bonnie had 2 more younger siblings, Adam and Samantha. They always looked up to their beloved older sister, who was caring, kind, and full of life. She excelled at everything she set her mind to, especially in academics and sports. She became the first girl at her university to engage in wrestling. Due to Gary's work, the family frequently moved. Bonnie attended 8 different schools, which taught her how to quickly adapt to new environments. Despite Karen and Gary deciding to divorce a few years later, Bonnie adored her stepfather and chose to live with him. Moreover, Gary's house was only 15 minutes away from the university where Bonnie enrolled. She chose to major in psychology at the University of Alaska in snowy and cold Anchorage. Not everyone would call Alaska paradise, but Bonnie and her siblings liked it much more than California or Texas. Perhaps one of the reasons why Bonnie wanted to live in Alaska was Cameron Miyazaki, her boyfriend. He was a year older than her, and they seemed to be made for each other. After graduating from an Anchorage school, Cameron headed to California to study architecture, but they stayed in touch via phone calls and emails. Unfortunately, Bonnie's life was not entirely without clouds. At a very young age, she experienced a serious tragedy. Her best friend died due to drunk driving. This event changed Bonnie's life and unexpectedly influenced future events. After her friend's death, Bonnie promised never to drink alcohol and never to get behind the wheel. She categorically refused to drive, preferring to walk or use public transportation. Fortunately, Gary's house was close to her university, which was very convenient. She would take the public bus to her classes 3 times a week and walked the 3-kilometer distance from her father's house to the bus stop. On other days, she worked part-time at a supermarket. The path to the bus stop partially led along a remote road, and it could be dangerous, especially for a girl walking alone in the pre-dawn darkness. Bonnie was aware of the hidden dangers and even told her sister that she always needed to carry pepper spray. She had one, but would it be enough if someone attacked her with the vilest intentions? On the morning of September 28, 1994, Bonnie woke up at 5 o'clock, got ready and, as usual, headed to the bus stop. It was a 45-minute walk, so even though classes started at 7 o'clock, she always left early to make sure she wouldn't be late. Samantha heard her sister get up and hurriedly prepare for her classes. She was confident that Bonnie had made it to her English class, which she had been preparing for all evening. 9 hours later, another student was taking photos on the Chugach Trail in the park south of Anchorage. It was located 25 kilometers from Bonnie's home, and it offered stunning photography opportunities. When the student focused her camera on the picturesque surroundings, something caught her attention. Something was floating in the water beneath a 10-meter cliff, and this bright blue object seemed unnatural against the rushing white foam of the water. Sharpening the focus, the girl realized with horror that it was a woman. Her lifeless body was floating in the shallow river. In 1994, the girl didn't have a mobile phone, of course, so she rushed to the parking lot, got into her car, and drove to the nearest phone, where she dialed 911. The police officers from the state of Alaska responded to the call. The woman, still very young, was floating face down at the base of a high cliff. Today, in 2023, there is a barrier on that cliff, but in 1994, it didn't exist. So if a person was walking there, tripped and fell, they could easily have suffered a fatal injury. Initially, the police thought that's what had happened. The forensic expert made a preliminary conclusion that Bonnie had drowned, but had also sustained several serious head injuries, possibly during the fall. She didn't have a purse or a backpack with her, but there was a ring, Bonnie Craig's university ring. The police needed to contact her family, and by the time the officers were certain it was Bonnie and knocked on the door of the family's home, it was 10 in the evening. Gary, Samantha, and Adam were waiting for Bonnie any minute. The children were eavesdropping on the stairs when they saw their father fall to his knees and break down in tears after hearing the officer's words. They realized that something had happened to their sister, but hoped that she was in the hospital and everything would be okay. It turned out to be not the case. Bonnie's mother, Karen, was vacationing on a yacht in Florida with her new boyfriend at the time. She never for a moment believed the police report that her daughter could have died while taking a walk in the park when she was supposed to be in class. How did she get there without a car? And why did she go there in the first place? She considered it nonsense. She was convinced that it wasn't her daughter. However, when she arrived for identification, she had to admit that it was Bonnie lying on the morgue table. But Karen noticed something else. There were clear defensive injuries on her daughter's arms. She immediately asked the officers if they had collected any evidence at the crime scene. However, they replied that it was just an unfortunate accident, and there was nothing to collect. Had she been assaulted? Where were her belongings? Karen had a lot of questions, but the investigators weren't willing to share information with her. Karen, who had worked as a reporter, knew exactly what to do. She turned to the media, giving interviews and drawing as much attention as possible to her daughter's case, insisting that it was a murder. The police asked her to stop and not interfere with the investigation. But what investigation could there be if her daughter's death was being treated as an accident? She continued to make noise persistently. In reality, detectives were indeed investigating this case as a homicide, but they didn't want to disclose it to Bonnie's family or the media. They chose this tactic because they believed the crime was committed by someone close to the victim, possibly even a family member or boyfriend, and they feared that if the perpetrator sensed danger, they might go into hiding. After conducting an autopsy, the forensic expert concluded that Bonnie had been murdered, receiving 11 blows to the head with an unidentified object. She had a broken finger and abrasions on intimate parts of her body. Semen was found on her body and clothing. Additionally, an officer discovered a piece of paper with a drop of blood 2 meters from the edge of the cliff. The presence of blood in that location should not have occurred in the case of an accident. This means that something happened before she fell from the cliff. However, there were no other pieces of evidence or signs of struggle. At least 2 people had seen Bonnie walking to the bus stop, but there was no evidence that she boarded the bus. The police concluded that the killer had intercepted her while she was walking on the road in the darkness. Officers requested DNA samples, fingerprints, and hair from all family members. Karen was surprised by the need for the children's samples. Then an officer confessed to her that they actually needed Gary's sample, but it would look suspicious if they only took his DNA. Karen wondered if Gary could be related to Bonnie's death. According to Gary, Bonnie had told him she wanted to be buried in Canada, but maybe he wanted to send her body far from Anchorage. Moreover, on the day of her death, he shouldn't have been home. He was on a business trip and came back early for some unclear reason. He had also been upset when Bonnie didn't return home on time, even though she was supposed to be looking after their younger siblings. But could he have been so angry as to harm her? Gary had always treated Bonnie like his own daughter, but doubts were forming in Karen's mind. However, the DNA analysis did not yield any matches. Additionally, Samantha and Adam, the younger children, stated that on the morning of the murder, their father was at home, clearing ice from the car before heading to work. While the police were collecting DNA samples from nearly all the men Bonnie had interacted with, Karen decided to conduct her own investigation because the officers were avoiding her and not sharing information. Frustrated, Karen decided to start her own investigation by retracing her daughter's steps. At 5 o'clock in the morning, she set out from Gary's house to understand where Bonnie might have been abducted. The first part of the journey seemed relatively safe, with houses and streetlights on both sides of the road, and she could walk on the larger sidewalks without getting too close to the road. However, soon the houses and sidewalks disappeared, and Karen found herself walking on a road surrounded by dense woods. Here, Karen encountered a moose. Meeting a moose in Alaska is quite common, but when these animals defend their territory, they can behave quite aggressively. Karen didn't know what to do and hid behind a street lamp. The moose eventually left, but then trouble arose again. 2 people stopped to help Karen, a truck driver and a police officer. This gave Karen food for thought. Of course, Bonnie would never have gotten into a stranger's car, but if she had been attacked by a wild animal, she might have accepted an offer of a ride in desperation. On the other hand, it would have been risky for the killer because the road was patrolled by police officers. Karen was amazed at how dangerous the path was that her daughter had taken in the dark several times a week. But she understood that Bonnie had never complained to her because she didn't want her mother to worry and forbid her to live with her stepfather, as Alaska had become her home. In January 1995, 5 months after Bonnie's death,
and seeing Karen's persistence, the police gave her what she desperately needed. They allowed her to see the report from the medical examiner, but didn't permit her to discuss it with anyone. The woman received confirmation of what she already knew. Her daughter had been sexually assaulted and then killed. Now the police were looking for a DNA match. It's important to note that CODIS, The FBI's DNA database was in its infancy, launched 4 years before Bonnie's death, and it wouldn't be fully operational until 1998. This means that until the police find a suspect, they won't get a match. Crossing out Gary and Cameron from the list of suspects, as Cameron was in a different state, investigators found that one of Bonnie's colleagues at the supermarket was overly infatuated with her. The girl even complained to her manager about the guy when he used a work computer to find out her phone number. He didn't stop calling her despite all her requests to stop. Another colleague missed a work meeting that was scheduled around the same time Bonnie was killed. 2 guys provided DNA samples, and it turned out to be a false lead. At the same time, Karen unexpectedly discovered that she might have a connection to her daughter's murder. It turns out that for the past 3 years, she had been working as a reserve officer in the Anchorage Police Department. Reserve officers are called upon when the police need additional assistance. Karen was used for undercover operations, posing as a buyer of illegal substances to catch dealers. The police did everything possible to hide her identity during operations, ensuring that no one saw her face or heard her voice. However, after the arrest of 7 associates of a local criminal organization, a fellow police officer secretly shared his thoughts with her. He was convinced that after Karen participated in the arrest, the gang leader targeted her family. The informant explained that Bonnie might have been killed as a message to the Anchorage Police Department to leave them alone. Perhaps the criminals wanted to eliminate her because she had once lived at that address, and her daughter could easily be mistaken for her, especially in the darkness. Of course, Karen immediately reported this to the detective working on Bonnie's case, but she didn't like the response she received. After sharing all the information, the detective was more interested in knowing the source of her information. He accused her of interfering with the investigation and refused to pursue her theory. Years later, Karen was convinced that the detectives had dismissed this lead, but she was mistaken. A year later, Karen unexpectedly learned that the police were working on a new lead. Bonnie's English teacher, whose class Bonnie was planning to attend that morning, called her. The teacher told the police that one of Bonnie's classmates might be responsible for her death. She had assigned her students the task of keeping a journal, and she was alarmed by how dark and filled with rage one student's journal was, particularly when he mentioned the date of September 28th, the day Bonnie was murdered. He wrote that it would be a tough day. What made it suspicious was that the student had skipped her class for 7 hours on that very day, and when he later turned in his assignment to the teacher, he was soaking wet, as if he had just come out of the shower, and he smelled like he had sprayed himself with an entire bottle of cologne. After reading the student's journal, Karen was convinced she had found a lead to her daughter's killer. If he attended classes at the same time as Bonnie, she might not have been afraid to get into his car, and the cologne could have concealed the smell of pepper spray. It was the most significant lead she had come across. Karen asked the investigators to examine the journal, but the police responded that they had already taken a DNA sample from the student and would only look at the journal if there was a match. This approach made sense in terms of saving time and police resources, but what if there were 2 attackers and only one of them had assaulted Bonnie? Karen was disappointed with the police's response and once again took it upon herself to investigate the life of the suspicious student. She found out that the student had been charged with assault but was released on bail, which was posted by his friend, who was also accused of murder. In other words, the student associated with questionable individuals. And furthermore, he appeared at the crime scene in the park when the police were removing Bonnie's body. Upon learning all of this, Karen concluded that her boyfriend's friend had committed the murder and already imagined how the 2 suspects would soon be arrested. But a few weeks later, the sergeant informed her that the DNA didn't match. Karen's disappointment knew no bounds, and she still had no doubt that somehow one of her boyfriend's associates was connected to her daughter's murder. The investigation had come full circle. Detectives were hoping to find a breakthrough in Bonnie's daily schedule. Around 5:20 a.m. on that day, a girl delivering newspapers saw Bonnie and accurately described her clothing. Another witness noticed an unfamiliar car parked in front of Bonnie's house, idling. An anonymous tipster reported seeing Bonnie talking to 2 brunette men in a car at a bus stop. But the most intriguing testimonies came from a retired surgeon who regularly jogged in the mornings. He saw a girl matching Bonnie's description at 10 a.m., walking with 2 guys and another girl. The man provided a detailed description of Bonnie's clothing: a blue denim jacket, a white scarf, white or khaki jeans, and white sneakers. He couldn't remember the color of her shirt, but remembered her because of his medical knowledge. Bonnie had an epicanthic fold, a fold of skin on the upper eyelid, often referred to as Mongolian fold. He saw Bonnie on the street and later recognized her in a newspaper photo. The police investigated all these leads, but the investigation did not move forward. 3 years into the case, a significant lead emerged, primarily related to DNA. The new suspect was the driver of the same bus that Bonnie was supposed to take. Several women and girls accused the driver of harassment. Before this, he worked as a substitute teacher in Pennsylvania, from where he was dismissed due to inappropriate comments towards female students. Shortly after Bonnie's murder, the man moved to California, but the most crucial aspect was the potential DNA match. The man's lawyer immediately demanded another test using more advanced technology, and it turned out to be another false lead. Semen found on Bonnie's body belonged to a different man. Furthermore, the driver had an alibi. Why did the DNA samples initially match? Because the initial DNA comparison was done using 12 markers. Over time, technology became more sophisticated, providing much more accurate information. It had been 12 years since that morning when Bonnie left home and never returned. The investigation was handled by a team working on old, unsolved cases when they were informed about a DNA match. The police immediately informed Karen, who greeted the news with skepticism. She quickly asked if the analysis could be trusted this time. When they told her they were 100% sure this time, a whirlwind of questions raced through her mind. Who was the new suspect? Did he work with her daughter, go to school with her, or know her classmate? But the answer stunned her because it was something she couldn't even imagine. He wasn't one of those already questioned by the officers. The suspect had come into the sight of the Alaska police solely thanks to the DNA CODIS database. He had long left the state and was currently serving time in a prison in New Hampshire. The suspect's name was Kenneth Dion, and in 1994 he was 25 years old, which made him 7 years older than Bonnie. He was arrested in New Hampshire in connection with a robbery in 2003, but his DNA sample was only added to the database in 2006. Investigators immediately flew to New Hampshire. During Kenneth's interrogation, he remained relaxed and answered questions as if he were old friends with the officers. He didn't ask why detectives from Alaska had flown all the way to talk to him. Kenneth shared that he was deeply involved in Eastern martial arts and had ranked 10th in a World Wrestling Championship. He loved using nunchucks and sayes, which he always kept in his car. The detective gradually steered the conversation toward what interested him most, and Kenneth revealed that in 1994, he was married and had just welcomed a daughter. He confessed that his family had been the best thing in his life, but everything spiraled out of control when he started using drugs. Although he managed to quit briefly and enlist in the military when he served in Anchorage, he was discharged from the Army due to drug-related issues. The detective casually inquired whether he kept up with the news while living in Alaska and whether he remembered a girl named Bonnie. Kenneth noticeably tensed up, but her name and photo didn't trigger any memories. After all, where could a grown married man and drug user have met a diligent 18-year-old freshman, he wondered. Where indeed? That was what the detectives had to find out. Kenneth finally realized where the investigators were heading and demanded a lawyer. Meanwhile, the police continued digging. It turned out that Kenneth had been released on parole 2 months before Bonnie's murder and was rearrested 2 months after it for violating the conditions of his parole. In total, the young man had been accused of crimes 18 times, 8 of which were serious offenses. According to his former girlfriend, Kenneth boasted that he could kill someone and get away with it. Supposedly, he had killed someone in Alaska and couldn't go back there.
The prosecutor wasn't sure if there was enough evidence for a conviction, so they offered Kenneth a plea deal of 75 years in prison, which he refused. In 2007, he was charged with first and second-degree murder and assault on Bonnie. He couldn't be charged with kidnapping because the statute of limitations had expired. The extradition process and legal nuances took a lot of time, but finally, in 2011, Kenneth appeared before a judge in Alaska. Kenneth's attorneys acted quite persistently and aggressively. They constructed their version of events around the idea that on September 28th, there was an unfortunate accident. Bonnie Craig was walking in the park, tripped and fell, and Kenneth wasn't even near the park that day. As indirect evidence, they cited the words of a newspaper girl and other witnesses, none of whom claimed to have seen a red-haired man or his black Ford Tempo. Moreover, they argued that if he had struck the girl 11 times in the head, there should have been a significant amount of blood at the scene. As for the DNA found on the girl's body, her clothing and jeans, Kenneth recalled that he did, in fact, know Bonnie, and they had consensual intimate relations before the day of the incident. In essence, the defense tried to paint a picture where Bonnie had a double life and was involved with other men behind her boyfriend Cameron's back. But this theory appeared to be far-fetched. The defense's version failed to explain how the girl made her way to the park without a car, where she left her backpack, and why she didn't shower or change clothes for several days, especially when Kenneth's semen was found on her clothing and jeans. On the other hand, the prosecutor faced a challenging task. He had only DNA evidence and nothing else to link Kenneth to the murder. There were no witnesses, no apparent motive, and no murder weapon. Even establishing that a murder had occurred proved to be a complex endeavor. The forensic expert stated that the girl had been struck 11 times in the head, and the injuries from the blows were consistent with being hit by an object, which could not have resulted from a fall from a cliff. There was also a drop of blood found on a leaf at the cliff's edge, indicating that something occurred up there. Remarkably, the family wasn't even aware of this piece of evidence. They only discovered it 16 years later. As for why only a drop of blood was found at the crime scene, according to the prosecutor's theory, the attack on Bonnie began in the car. Presumably, she tried to resist using her self-defense skills, but the man with a black belt in Eastern martial arts overpowered her. He brought her to the park, assaulted her, and she managed to escape, either by jumping or falling into the water. Kenneth then followed her into the water and used nunchucks or a sickle to attack her until she perished. The jury believed the prosecution's version and found Kenneth guilty on all charges. He was sentenced to 124 years in prison and could potentially be eligible for parole at the age of 80. It was only during the trial, when Karen saw the video of the officers meticulously investigating the area near the cliff on their knees, working in the water meter by meter, that she realized they had taken the investigation seriously from the very beginning and did not consider the incident to be an accident. For all those years, she had wrongly blamed them for inaction, even though they had never ceased the investigation. Furthermore, Karen recognized the crucial role that DNA played in this case and began actively advocating for states to collect DNA samples from all individuals incarcerated or arrested for serious crimes. Initially, only 6 states supported this idea. Karen presented her arguments to the then governor of Alaska, and within 12 days, they were able to draft and pass the corresponding law. Today, all states collect DNA samples from individuals accused of serious crimes.
On the evening of Friday, April 20th, 2012, the Celis family had a very pleasant time. Rebecca and Sergio's 2 sons played a baseball game in which their 6-year-old sister, young Isabel, was present. The game lasted until 10 o'clock, after which the family returned home. The next morning, the girl was supposed to play baseball, and Rebecca braided her hair so as not to waste time before work. At 11 o'clock, Sergio wished his daughter good night and left. Although Isabel had her own bedroom, she often slept in her brother's room. But on this particular night, she stayed alone. Soon, Becky and the boys went to sleep, and Sergio fell asleep on the couch, watching a baseball game he had recorded earlier. At 5 o'clock, the man woke up and slowly made his way to the bedroom. The house was quiet and peaceful when he went to sleep next to his wife. 2 hours later, Rebecca left for work at the medical center. The woman didn't notice anything strange in the house and didn't hear anything. She didn't go into her daughter's room before leaving for work. At around 8 o'clock in the morning, Sergio went to wake his daughter up to go to the game, but Isabel was not in her bed. He asked his sons if they had seen their sister, but nobody responded. Together with the boys, he searched the house and called for Isabel, but there was no answer. Then, Sergio Jr., who was 14 years old at the time, noticed that the window in his sister's room was wide open and the protective screen was lying on the ground in the yard. The husband called his wife. While Rebecca was racing home and the sons were frantically searching the neighborhood for their younger sister, Sergio called the rescue service. This was the call that later sparked a lot of controversy and criticism towards him.
People react differently in a state of stress or panic, but Sergio was surprisingly calm and collected during the call. Besides his calmness, it seemed strange to many that he immediately stated that his daughter had been kidnapped. He even laughed when he mentioned telling his wife to come home. Later, Sergio explained that he was simply trying to remain calm to provide the police with all the information they needed. Interestingly, the neighbor also called 911 on behalf of Sergio Jr. Unlike his father, he was shaking and clearly upset, but he also immediately stated that his sister had been kidnapped and they wouldn't find her. Then the phone was handed over to Rebecca, who had also been in a panic and despair when she arrived home. She was able to give a precise description of the clothing that her daughter was wearing before her disappearance. The arriving officers indeed found a protective screen on the bedroom window of the girl on the ground in the yard. There was a large hole in it, as if someone had used a tool to make it. Soft toys were always lying under the girl's window in the room, and now they were scattered in disorder. Blood was discovered on the floor next to Isabel. Shoe prints were found behind the house, on the alley and on the electrical box under the high fence of the family. Presumably, the perpetrator climbed over it when he abducted the girl. The police organized massive searches, going from door to door, believing it was a kidnapping case, rejecting the idea that the 6-year-old girl could have run away. The neighbor of the Celis family, Alicia Stardivant, said that she was woken up by a noise around 6:30 a.m. Her bedroom is literally across the fence from the girl's room. The girl said that she heard her dogs and the Celis family dogs barking. Besides them, she heard men's voices, seemingly on her side of the fence, not at the Celis family's home. But it was already getting light outside, and she didn't pay attention to it and fell asleep again. Alicia noted that the men did not lower their voices or whisper, and she didn't think for a second that there was also a small child there. The police set up a checkpoint around the Celis family's house and only allowed local residents through. The search initially focused on a small area around the house because in most cases, children are killed within a radius of 100 meters from the place of abduction. Then they expanded the search radius, included several apartment buildings, and interviewed residents. Officers checked the stadium where Isabel's baseball game was supposed to take place, the local garbage dump. The lakes and ponds were inspected with underwater cameras and sonars. Forensic experts and search dogs searched the Celis family's home, and border guards distributed photos of Isabel because when children go missing in Arizona, there is a high chance they end up on the other side of the border with Mexico. In addition, in 2012, 16 criminals who had committed violent acts against women and children lived near the family's home. All of them were interrogated and excluded at that time. A theory emerged that someone had noticed Isabel playing with her brothers in the evening, followed the family, and abducted the girl from the house at night. Following this lead, officers checked the registration numbers of all the cars in the parking lot. Surveillance video cameras located near the family's home showed an unusually active nightlife. At 2:36 a.m., a private security company's car appeared in the alley near the house, and 2 more cars were shown in the parking lot 10 minutes later. Suddenly, a large number of pedestrians were wandering around the house, some of them interested in garbage cans, and an hour before the 911 call, a car quickly turned the corner near the trash can. But the girl did not appear anywhere in the 10 hours of filming. However, something interesting was discovered during the search of the house by the police. The officers found inscriptions on the door frame of Isabel's wardrobe. The inscriptions were written in a child's handwriting and included such words as bad father, I don't love father, and bad day. Rebecca claimed she had no idea about this, but the police decided to interrogate Isabel's family more thoroughly. One of the sons revealed that when their father drank, he became aggressive, cursed, and hit him twice. Therefore, investigators invited employees of the Child Protection Services concerned about the Celis sons, especially since, as it turned out, Child Protection Services had been called to the family's home more than once. In January 2012, One of the boys was washing dishes and left a glass in the detergent. Sergio drank water from that glass and scolded his son for his mistake. Rebecca insists that they laughed about the incident. But the next day, the boy told his friends about it, and someone's parents contacted the Child Protection Services. Anyway, in May 2012, at their request, Sergio voluntarily left the house, although Rebecca claimed that her husband was an excellent father and when Isabel returned home, all questions would be answered. Although the incident was soon resolved, and Sergio was able to return home to his wife and sons, the family was upset that the investigation did not bring any results. Although the incident was soon resolved and Sergio was able to return home to his wife and children, the family was upset that the police continued to focus on them, especially Sergio, despite never being named a suspect. Later, the man stated, "It feels like the investigation never went beyond this house. That's what's so upsetting." So they hired Private Detective Jerry Snyder to conduct an unbiased investigation into Isabel's abduction. And his suspicions fell on Rebecca's cousin, Justin Mastromarino. At first, Justin acted as a representative of the family, constantly speaking to journalists and giving interviews. But within 2 weeks of Isabel's disappearance, he sent his car to Florida, hired the best lawyer, and left, refusing to answer reporters or police's questions. Such behavior seemed strange to the private detective. Moreover, Justin had lived in the Celis family's home for a long time and still had a key to the house. There was a version that Justin, who had previously stayed overnight in Isabel's room, could owe money to someone and the criminal came for him. But instead of Justin, he found Isabel in the room and took her for ransom or as leverage. On the other hand, his friend Sebastian Hartsfield is confident that Mastromarino did the right thing, and if he had the means, he would have left too. The thing is, Justin was tired of the intrusive attention of the media and the public. Sebastian said that they spent the evening of the abduction together with Justin. He reluctantly admits that it was April 20th, National Cannabis Day, so he and Justin smoked and drank all evening, although there was a 6-hour gap when they were asleep, and he cannot say for sure where Justin was. Sebastian is confident in his friend's innocence. When the police finally questioned Justin, the police chief said that the investigator hired by the family had no evidence, but the police were absolutely sure of Justin's innocence. It is worth noting that Sergio was also suspected of owing money to bad people, and his daughter was kidnapped for ransom. Isabel was at the age when children are more often abducted by relatives. She was kidnapped from the house where only her relatives were present, and Sergio was the last person to see her, kissing her goodnight at 11 o'clock. He did not pass a polygraph test. Moreover, the fact that the dogs barked at night indirectly confirms the involvement of someone from the family. How could a stranger know where the girl's room was, that she wouldn't be sleeping in her brother's bedroom, and that there would be no dogs in her room? Usually, at least one of them slept in her bedroom. How could the kidnapper know exactly how to avoid the surveillance cameras located on the street? Yet, besides suspicion, there was nothing linking Sergio or Justin to the crime. Where was Isabel? Let's go back to the morning of July 23, 2012, when the rescue service received 3 distress calls. A child, a girl, called and said she wanted to report a kidnapping. She mentioned Isabel's name and said he's coming, identified the district where she was located, and then the call disconnected. The officers went to the specified district, but they didn't find anyone. They traced the call to an apartment building where 2 sisters, aged 9 and 11, lived. The sisters had simply decided to play a prank. The calls caused a lot of fuss, but they were quickly released. However, their joke cost the city $4,700 in officers' wages spent on the search in the district specified by the girls. After this incident, the police tried several times to draw attention to the case, for example, by sharing an image of what Isabel might look like several years later. But despite all efforts, there was no progress in the case for years. Who kidnapped Isabel? Was it someone unknown to the family who entered through a window and took her? Did Justin consider kidnapping Isabel because he was in debt and wanted to demand a ransom, but the kidnapping went wrong. Was one of her brothers involved in what happened to her, and are their relatives covering it up? Or does Isabel's biological father know more than he's saying? Unexpectedly, on February 8, 2017, there was a breakthrough in the case. A woman named Melissa contacted the FBI and stated that they should speak to her fiancé, Christopher Clements, about the disappearance of Isabel. Supposedly, he might know something about the girl's disappearance, but Melissa couldn't say anything more and they should talk to him. Finding Christopher proved to be quite easy. He was in jail on charges of robbery. Christopher confirmed to the agents that he knew where to find Isabel, but demanded a deal. In exchange for information about Isabel's whereabouts, he wants his charges dropped, his confiscated Acura Honda returned, and full immunity in Isabel's case. He assured them that he only knows what happened to the girl. It is also known to a member of the Celis family. He hinted that Sergio knew about the kidnapping of his daughter and was involved in it. Christopher told them that Sergio was seen handing over Mexican gold coins to someone at a local pawn shop. Supposedly, there was a fight and Isabel was taken to get the money that her father owed for the stolen coins. Christopher spoke very broadly, and no matter how much the agents questioned him, he didn't go into details. The man stood his ground, information in exchange for a deal. He got what he wanted. The prosecutor's office went for a deal, dropped the charges of robbery and returned the car. The man revealed where to find Isabel, and on March 3, 2017, the police and the FBI found her remains. Rebecca and Sergio Celis faced the grim confirmation that Isabel had left forever. Whatever dreams they had of a happy reunion were destroyed. However, the deal did not give Christopher Clements the desired freedom. Instead, he was transferred to the Maricopa County Jail, where he was charged with another robbery. The agreement did not provide full immunity, which Christopher insisted on in Isabel's case. Investigators began digging deeper into the man's past. He started his criminal career at the age of 16 by committing first-degree violence. Since then, he had repeatedly gotten into trouble. The man's ex-wife said that Christopher was obsessed with adult movies, often brought girls from strip clubs home, and she was forced to sleep in the car until they left. And at the time of Isabel's disappearance, he worked at a shopping center only 2 kilometers away from her home. Undoubtedly, detectives checked Sergio's connection to the nearby pawn shop mentioned by Christopher. They found out that 21 gold coins were stolen from the woman's house 2 months before Isabel's abduction, and they believed that Christopher committed the theft. The surveillance camera captured him entering the pawn shop hours after the theft, delivering the goods, and receiving the money. The video did not suggest Sergio's involvement or any connection to the case. Most likely, Christopher was just studying the accusations against Sergio, which were mentioned in the press, and was talking to agents, trying to cast a shadow on the girl's father. The police received several search warrants, including one for the house where Christopher and his fiancée Melissa used to live. In one corner of the yard, investigators found a sheet of plywood under which was a plastic container containing ashes and several gruesome discoveries, including a faded lilac child's hoodie with a hood and a school assignment of a very young child with the name Mercedes on it. Her full name was Isabel Mercedes Celis. They also found indecent photos of girls aged 3 to 13 on Christopher's devices. Searches on his computer included Isabel Celis, unsolved cases in Arizona, and child killer acquitted. A former acquaintance of Christopher's said he talked about the Isabel case and let slip that there might be evidence in the trunk of his car, so it was crucial to bring it back. The car was described as a Honda Acura that was returned to the man in exchange for information about Isabel's whereabouts. It is still unknown how Isabel died, but according to the same acquaintance, she was suffocated and her body was doused with chemicals. The man remembered that Christopher showed him photos of the Celis house that he had hidden in a Bible in his room. Investigators obtained a warrant for this Bible and indeed found pictures of the house.
2 months later, the Tucson police chief announced that they had a suspect, 36-year-old Christopher Clements, who had been charged with not one, but 2 murders. The thing is, on March 3, 2017, when Christopher described to agents the location where they would find Isabel, he mentioned an important marker, a pile of tires that clearly did not appear there in just one day. This instruction immediately alarmed the agents, because a few years ago, the police found the body of a teenage girl from Tucson near that same tire pile. The girl's name was Maribel Gonzalez. In June 2014, 2 years had passed since Isabel's disappearance, when a rescue service dispatcher answered a horrifying call. A woman reported a body she had noticed by the roadside. The police who arrived on the call found signs that someone had been dragged on the ground, the smell of decay, and a naked body buried under the pile of tires. It was a location significantly distant from the nearest houses. The police shared with the media a photo of a chain with an anchor that the girl was wearing, as well as a tattoo on her collarbone, in hopes that the public would help identify her. Indeed, several people called the police saying that it was 13-year-old Maribel Gonzalez. Maribel's family said that she was seeing a 20-year-old man named Mariano. They had been together for 3 years but broke up a month before Maribel disappeared. Mariano told the police that she sent him a message around 11 to 12 p.m. on the day of her disappearance, asking him to pick her up because she had a fight with her mother. He ignored her message because he had to get up early for work. He never saw her again. Her boyfriend said that she loved to walk alone, even at night. She also liked to go to the mall, the same one near Isabel's house where Christopher Clements worked. The police linked these cases based on the fact that the bodies were found in close proximity to each other. Christopher's DNA was compared to the DNA found on Maribel, and it matched. Isabel was kidnapped and killed 2 years before Maribel. Could the perpetrator have been caught after the first crime and prevented Maribel's death? It turns out that Christopher's name came up during the investigation before his conversation with the agents in 2018, more than once. As it is already known, the officers contacted all individuals who committed sexual crimes and lived nearby Isabel, violent acts against women and children. The list contained 16 names, including Christopher. He was listed as a Class 3 offender, meaning with a very high likelihood of reoffending. The police talked to him, but obviously, he was able to convince the officer that he had nothing to do with the case. Perhaps his girlfriend provided him with an alibi. Furthermore, after Isabel's disappearance, her parents asked to recall any unexpected meetings, uninvited guests, traders, advertising agents, distributors, anyone who could arouse suspicion. Rebecca immediately remembered a man who was interested in their red Acura. He came twice, but the woman did not know his name, and he never entered the house. Interestingly, Christopher also mentioned that meeting during the interrogations. This is what he told FBI agents on February 10, 2017. According to him, 2 people pretended to be interested in the car. In fact, they needed to make sure that Sergio lived at that address. They approached Rebecca, and she gave them the phone number and said that they needed to talk about the possibility of buying from her husband Sergio. Thus, the men confirmed what they wanted. Christopher said that he just knew about this visit, but he himself never approached the Celis's house. However, during the conversation, he several times referred to we instead of they, as if confessing that one of the men was him. Christopher's description of the visit coincides with Rebecca's story, except for one detail. The woman described only one man who matched Christopher's description and drove the same car as he did. But her description differs slightly from the description given by her husband. What if the police had followed this lead immediately after Isabel's disappearance? Would it have led them to Christopher Clements? Investigators believe that the kidnapping of Isabel was not spontaneous. Christopher had planned his crimes. He repeatedly called the home of the woman from whom he stole gold coins when she was not home. He also called the Celis family home as early as October 2011. The day after the kidnapping, Christopher changed his phone number and washed his car. If cleaning his car usually cost him around $10, $35, this time he paid $110. However, changing his phone number did not help, as phone records linked Christopher to 2 crimes. Footprints found at the scene of Isabel's kidnapping matched sneakers that no one in the Celis family wore, but which Christopher was often seen wearing and even photographed in. Detectives also studied photos on his devices and found a miniature snapshot. It was a selfie of a man on the front seat of a car who looked like Clements, and a little girl lying on the back seat who was extremely similar to Isabel. The photo was shown to Sergio and Rebecca. The woman agreed that the girl resembled Isabel, but she could not say for sure because the image quality was terrible. Christopher claimed the child in the photo was his son. But when the photo was shown to Melissa, his fiancée, she began to shake. She did not recognize the child as her own. The child in the photo did not resemble the 1.5-year-old fair-haired boy. Instead, it was more like a dark-haired girl with her hair braided, which Isabel's mother had done just before the kidnapping. The defense argued that the footprints were initially described as work boots. Christopher did not have his phone with him during those calls, and the blood in Isabel's bedroom probably appeared before the kidnapping. Christopher's lawyers successfully pushed for 2 separate trials, one for the Isabel case and one for the Maribel case, so that the prosecutor could not present evidence for both crimes at once. However, this did not help him much because he had already been found guilty of Maribel Gonzalez's murder. He still has to face trial for the kidnapping of Isabel. On May 13, 2015, around 5 p.m., firefighters extinguished a raging fire in a garage by the roadside in the village of Sand Lake, Michigan. At that moment, a frightened woman ran up to their vehicle, shouting that her neighbors were dead. Several firefighters hurried with the woman to her neighbor's house. In the bedroom, lying on the floor in a pool of blood, were 2 lifeless bodies. It appeared that they had been shot. To preserve the evidence at the crime scene, the firefighters refrained from touching anything and immediately informed the police that they had found 2 bodies and required investigators and forensic experts. Forensic experts had been working at the crime scene for about an hour, collecting evidence and photographing the bodies of 46-year-old Martin Durham and 47-year-old Glenna Durham when one officer noticed a slight movement in Glenna's chest. Just a tiny bit. He rushed to her body and tried to feel for a pulse. But before he could touch her, Glenna's eyes opened wide, and she sat up abruptly, screaming, "What are you doing, Marty?" The officer immediately called for paramedics, who transported the injured woman to the local hospital. Marty and Glenna first met as teenagers in the early 1980s. Marty invited the girl on a date to a local open-air theater, where they lost their virginity on the very same evening, with little interest in the movie itself. Their relationship progressed quickly and passionately, but they broke up after a few months, partly because 17-year-old Glenna was married. Soon Marty started a family of his own. Christina Keller was 14 years old when she met 19-year-old Marty at a party held at his house. The young man seemed charming and fun to the girl, but also a little strange because he immediately declared that he would marry her someday. The next day, Marty showed up at her doorstep. Apparently, he made a favorable impression on Christina's parents because after that, he never left her life. Their friendship developed into a romantic relationship, and soon 16-year-old Christina discovered that she was expecting their first child. Within 2 years, she was carrying their second son, which prompted the young couple to get married. 11 months later, Christina gave her husband a daughter. Christina was 19 and Marty was 24 at the time. Initially, the young family lived with relatives, but in early 1995, Marty obtained a higher-paying job at a factory in Michigan, and the family of 5 moved there. However, on the evening of February 16, 1995, while returning from work, Marty was involved in a car accident. Another vehicle, speeding through a red light, collided with his car. The larger vehicle practically crushed Marty's car, trapping him inside. Marty was taken to the hospital, where he was in a clinically dead state for about 5 minutes. The left side of his body suffered severe injuries, and he remained in a coma for over 3 weeks. When he finally regained consciousness, he had no recollection of his wife, children, or much of his past life. He spent 1.5 years learning to walk, speak, eat, and take care of himself again. Throughout this time, Christina supported him. Physically, Marty increasingly resembled his former self, but psychologically, he had changed. Due to the brain trauma, he experienced bouts of rage. He never raised his hand against his wife and children, but became a domineering person. Even his sense of humor became darker. In 2000, almost 5 years after the accident, Christina filed for divorce. She still cared deeply for her husband, but her feelings had transformed into more of a maternal nature, as she took on the role of his caregiver and could no longer relate to him in any other way. In May 2001, Marty purchased his first home using the funds he received from the insurance company, along with a bank loan. The house was located in the small village of Sand Lake, Michigan, where only 500 people reside. Marty was incredibly proud of his new home, where he moved in with his 2 sons and an African gray parrot named Bud. 2 months after moving into the house, Marty was surprised by a knock on his door from a 16-year-old girl who claimed to be his daughter. Marty asked who her mother was, and it turned out to be Glenna, his first love. The girl knew that her mother had had an affair early in her marriage, and she was born a few months later. She wanted to establish her paternity for certain. A DNA test confirmed that the girl was indeed Marty's biological daughter, born out of wedlock. This revelation led to the rekindling of Marty and Glenna's relationship, despite Glenna still being married. Clearly, Glenna had never been able to forget Marty, as she had a tattoo with his name on her arm throughout her marriage. Glenna divorced her husband and moved in with Marty. They were very happy together and soon had a new wedding ceremony. Glenna's new husband meant everything to her. The couple spent all their time together, visiting family, and going to the local casino once or twice a week. Even when Marty went hunting, Glenna would sit in the car and read a novel. Officially taking on the responsibility of caring for her husband, Glenna received $3,200 per month for her services. Marty's disability benefits amounted to over $1,000 per month. Additionally, Glenna sold excess medication from Marty, so their monthly income was approximately $5,000. When Marty's sons moved out, this income was sufficient for their life in the small village. However, by 2010, Marty's health, both mental and physical, had deteriorated significantly. The couple continued to spend all their time together and with their friends, including Connie and Keith Ream, another neighboring couple. On Monday, May 11, 2015, Marty offered to mow the lawn in Connie and Keith's backyard. He enjoyed doing this work and did it completely free of charge. Later that evening, all 4 of them, Connie, Keith, Marty, and Glenna, sat on the neighbor's terrace, and the Durhams returned home around 9 p.m. The next day, on Tuesday, at 8:26 a.m., Keith sent Marty a message asking how he was feeling, but he didn't receive a response. This was strange because Marty always promptly answered calls and messages. Throughout the day, Keith sent several more messages to his friend with the same result. Later that day, Connie approached the neighbor's door and knocked. She heard the Shelby family's dog barking, but no one opened the door. Keith even sent a joking message to Glenna saying, "What did you do to Marty?" Of course, she didn't respond to him either. On Wednesday, at 7:30 a.m., Connie approached the neighbor's house again and rang the doorbell. The only response she received was the dog barking. She walked around the house, checking if any doors or windows were open. Everything was locked as usual. Throughout the day, Connie and Keith tried to contact their neighbors, becoming increasingly worried. After work, around 4:30 p.m., Connie approached the neighbor's house for the 3rd time and knocked. She was sure she would have to break the door, but to her surprise, When she touched the handle, she discovered that the door was not locked this time. Connie cautiously opened the door and called out for the neighbors. But at the door, she was only met by the Shelby family pet, who led her into the living room where there was a gruesome mess. Documents and photographs were scattered everywhere, a broken lamp and other items were in disarray. Following Shelby into the bedroom, Connie found the homeowners lying on the floor in a pool of blood. Marty was only in his underwear, while Glenna was fully dressed, with her legs covered by a blanket. Connie rushed out of the neighbor's house and ran towards a fire truck she noticed further down the road. Marty was not as lucky as his wife. 5 bullets that hit his back, forearm, and chest left him no chance of survival. He had been dead for several days. Glenna was shot twice, with both shots hitting the area behind her right ear. Blood was found not only in the bedroom, but also on the chair in the living room and on a pillow with 2 bullet holes. Underneath the chair, a gun and 2 empty shells were found. In the bedroom, there were 5 more shell casings, 1 near the door and 4 near Marty's body, totaling 7 in total. However, the gun found near the chair was designed for 6 bullets. This means that the perpetrator found time to reload the gun before continuing the shooting. Apart from the living room and bedroom, the rooms in the house appeared completely normal. There were no signs of forced entry, and in the kitchen, there was a bowl of spaghetti and a piece of garlic bread on the table. Later that same evening, when Glenna was taken to the hospital, Marty's children were allowed to take the family pets, a dog and a parrot, and bring them to their mother's house, Christina. Although the children were only permitted to take the pets, the trio did not miss the opportunity to search the house and discovered a sealed envelope with the word personal written on it. Inside, they found letters from Glenna addressed to her children and ex-husband. In the letters, she expressed her love for the children and asked for their forgiveness for not being the best mother. She also asked her ex-husband to take care of the children. Additionally, in Glenna's drawer, they found a packet of unpaid bills. They handed over all the findings to the police. The investigators began questioning the family's relatives and friends about their relationships and financial situation. They loved spending time together and were truly absorbed in each other's company. However, it soon became clear that they were facing serious financial difficulties. Glenna was in charge of the family's accounts, and relatives believed that Marty was unaware of the severity of their situation because he was quite frugal. On the other hand, Glenna had developed a serious addiction to gambling. She would spend hundreds of dollars on lottery tickets and lose thousands of dollars at the casino. But whenever her husband approached her, she would pretend to be playing with $1 bills. She played every week, and in 2010 alone, Glenna spent $75,000 on her addiction. The family had fallen behind on tax payments, had credit card debt, and Marty's car was on the verge of being repossessed. However, the most pressing issue was their home. Glenna hadn't made mortgage payments for over a year, and they had accumulated a debt of $48,000. In early April 2015, a few weeks before the attack on the family, Marty's mother saw a list of homes that would be seized due to debts, and Marty's address was listed there. She called Glenna, who assured her that the newspaper had printed the wrong address and that she would sort it out. Of course, it turned out that their home was indeed being taken away. Despite the fact that Marty had taken out the mortgage, on April 28th, Glenna received a notice that their home would be auctioned if they didn't pay $5,000. Interestingly, the auction was scheduled for May 12th, just a day before Marty and Glenna were found by their neighbor. The investigators concluded that Marty was unaware of the impending loss of their home because he had been renovating it for the past 2 months. Just 2 days before their deaths, he had painted the bathroom. After 3 days in the intensive care unit, Glenna regained consciousness. She had no recollection of the day of the murders or the preceding days. She couldn't even remember writing the letters to her children and ex-husband. Since the eyewitness couldn't provide any helpful information, the police had few leads or clues to work with.
The weapon contained multiple DNA samples, as Marty was an avid hunter and often showed his firearms to friends. However, Glenna and Marty also sold drugs, for which they received cash payments, and large sums of money were stored in envelopes in a safe. Could this have been an unplanned robbery? The living room was in disarray, as if someone had been searching for something, and the cash from the safe was indeed missing. This version of events seemed the most plausible, but finding the killer among the clients of their illegal activities was like looking for a needle in a haystack. A whole year passed before an unexpected witness helped solve the case. It was a 19-year-old parrot named Bud, who had been living with Christina for the past 12 months. Bud was an African great parrot and had the unique ability of not only mimicking sounds and words he heard in his environment, but also imitating human voices. Originally, he was Christina's beloved pet, but Marty took him, presumably as a way to get back at his ex-wife for leaving him. Upon returning to his beloved owner, Bud started reproducing various conversations he had heard while living with Marty, such as how Marty played with the dog. But at some point, he began repeating an argument between a man and a woman. They were clearly arguing with each other, raising their voices and occasionally mixing profanity with regular words. And at the end of the dialogue, a male voice shouted clearly, "No, no, don't shoot." Christina recorded this scene performed by the parrot on video but didn't report it to the police, thinking it would be laughed off. However, when a local journalist interviewed Marty's mother a year after his murder, she mentioned the video. The journalist became very interested and aired it on the news. The video quickly went viral, and the increased public attention forced the police to reopen the case and focus their attention on one suspect, Glenna Durham. They examined Marty and Glenna's phones and discovered that the last thing Marty did on his phone was search for information about lawnmowers on the evening of the 11th, after they returned home from the neighbors. The examination of Glenna's phone turned out to be much more intriguing. It had been used until the 13th, the day the bodies were found. From 3:32 a.m. to 4:48 a.m., someone used the phone 5 times to find information about the gun used in the shootings, including how to reload it. The last message was sent to Glenna's mother at 4:48 a.m. and said, "I love you, forgive me." Glenna was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. She insisted on her innocence, and her lawyer tried to prove that another family member or a stranger had broken into the house to steal medication, cash, or Marty's weapons. However, the forensic experts did not find any signs of forced entry into the house. And what about the money from the safe? It turned out that Marty's children had taken it while they were searching the house when Glenna was taken to the hospital and their father to the morgue. When investigators accidentally learned about this, they stated that nobody had asked them about the money at the police station, so they didn't say anything. In any case, the version of a robber was discarded because nothing was stolen. The prosecution's version of events painted a much more plausible picture. Here's what they believed happened. Since Marty was in his underwear, he could have been killed on the morning of the 12th. The man must have learned about the inevitable loss of the house, became very upset, and a heated argument ensued. When Glenna grabbed the weapon, Marty turned and tried to run into the bedroom. She shot him in the back. Marty was still on his feet, reaching for another weapon in the bedside table. Glenna fired again, hitting his forearm. Only then did he turn to face her, and she sent 3 more bullets into his chest. Marty fell lifeless on the bedroom floor. Glenna spent the whole day doing paperwork. She wrote letters to her ex-husband
and children and prepared spaghetti for lunch. When the neighbor showed up at her house for the first time on the evening of the 12th, Glenna was still engaged in these activities. Understanding that the neighbors would start to worry about her and Marty, no matter what Glenna planned, she needed to act quickly. She settled into a chair in the living room, placed a pillow against her head, and fired. However, nothing happened. The pillow absorbed the force of the shot, and the bullet barely grazed her. Since it was the last bullet in the pistol, she had to look up online how to reload it. This means she did not attempt it again until the early morning of the 13th when she sent a message to her mother. Perhaps she still had doubts when Connie knocked on the door again at 7:30 a.m. because the door was still locked. But when Connie left, Glenna must have unlocked the door, sat in the chair, took the pillow, and tried again. This time the injury turned out to be more serious, but as her doctor later explained, she did not hit any important veins, arteries, or penetrate the skull. It's hard to imagine what state she was in, but since head wounds always bleed profusely, she may have decided that she would simply bleed out. She made her way to the bedroom, where her husband's body had been lying all this time, and collapsed on the floor, covering her legs with a blanket. Whether she staged the scene when the police officer touched her or only regained consciousness at that moment is unknown. And we may never know because Glenna continues to claim memory loss. The jury believed the prosecution's version. On Wednesday, July 19, 2017, after 9 hours of deliberation, they found her guilty of murder. Glenna Durham was sentenced to life imprisonment. Of course, the Parrot named Badder was not invited to court as a witness. And it's not because he swears terribly. It's simply impossible to prove that he didn't hear that particular dialogue on a TV show or the radio, not to mention how he could take an oath in the witness stand. In other words, if Badder had participated in the process and less than 24 hours had passed since Glenna's guilty verdict, her lawyer would have filed an appeal. On March 5, 2018, the medical staff at a hospital in San Diego, California, was awaiting the arrival of a 28-year-old patient named Brigida. She was being transported by an ambulance from her family doctor's office. On that day, Brigida called her mother, Olga, complaining of feeling unwell. Olga struggled to get her into the car. Brigida could barely breathe, and her legs trembled with excruciating pain. With just one look at the once vibrant and healthy young woman, the family doctor knew that Brigida was in critical condition and there was nothing he could do for her. Therefore, he called an ambulance to take her to the clinic. The emergency department medics were also alarmed that they might not be able to stabilize the patient's condition. Brigida was in unbearable pain, could hardly see anything, could barely speak, and have no sensation in her feet or hands. But the most puzzling symptom was that her once beautiful chestnut hair was falling out in clumps. The doctors began their work. They quickly determined that there were no external signs of trauma on her body. No bruises, wounds, or indications of infection. The cause of her illness was internal. Brigida's mother explained that her daughter had been suffering from sudden episodes of nausea, fatigue, and excruciating pain for several months. The symptoms would occur suddenly without any warning, causing her to spend days in bed. Brigida could barely take care of herself, let alone her husband and young son. Various specialists she consulted were at a loss, unable to understand what was afflicting her. Her symptoms did not match any known illness. One doctor even told her that her case was how critical days manifest. Finally, the doctors concluded that it was a result of stress and prescribed her tranquilizers. However, her condition worsened, her body was failing, and the medical staff in the emergency department of San Diego understood that if they didn't figure out what was wrong with her as soon as possible, the patient could die within days. Brigida grew up in California, just a few kilometers away from the border with Mexico. Her father worked at the customs between Mexico and the United States, while her mother took care of their two daughters, Brigida and her younger sister Olga. The girls grew up in a loving and caring family. Brigida happily attended a Catholic school, excelling in her studies. Her friends described her as the friendliest and kindest girl they knew. Brigida had a passion for running and even participated in competitions representing her school. It was through running that she met her future husband, Race Remington Uto. They met in high school. Race attended a different school but was also passionate about sports. At first, Brigida's family didn't pay much attention to their friendship because their daughter wasn't interested in dating boys. Her time was consumed by studying and sports. However, gradually, the young couple became more and more involved with each other and started dating. Race managed to bring out a more adventurous side of Brigida, and soon they became inseparable. Race had a highly ambitious goal. He dreamt of attending the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis. The acceptance rate for students was less than 8%, making it a challenging task. The applicants had to excel in school, work on personal development, engage in sports, participate in community life, engage in volunteer work, and much more. Surprisingly, Race managed to gain admission to the academy, and he moved to Maryland to begin his education. The young couple continued their relationship long distance. However, after some time, Race was diagnosed with a hernia that didn't resolve completely. He had to leave the academy but found work as an electrician in the Navy. Meanwhile, Brigida pursued her own plans and became a teacher. In 2014, after 7 years of being together, 25-year-old Brigida and 24-year-old Race got married. Soon after, they welcomed their son. Brigida believed she was perfectly happy with everything in her life going according to plan. She had a loving, caring husband, a wonderful child, and lived just steps away from her parents. However, her life would soon take an extraordinary and painful turn that she could never have imagined. Among the emergency department physicians at San Diego Hospital, there was a certified toxicologist named Dr. Jeff LaPointe, which was considered rare. He was a true medical detective, and like an excellent detective, LaPointe followed the trail of clues that could lead him to understand what was happening to Bridget. Was she being killed by an autoimmune disease? No, blood tests did not confirm that. Could she be suffering from cancer? No, although one symptom stood out among all others. Hair loss was not due to the disease, but rather a result of therapy. All the symptoms indicated that Bridget had been exposed to a toxic chemical. But which one and how? Was it arsenic, cadmium, or cesium? No, because these heavy metals wouldn't result in hair loss. However, there was one substance that could: thallium. In the early 20th century, thallium was used as a depilatory agent. It was also actively utilized by doctors. For example, if a child had head lice, thallium was applied to their head, causing the lice to fall off along with all the hair. In subsequent years, thallium became the main component of rodent poisons. However, by the 1970s, its popularity as a murder weapon, alongside arsenic, had increased to the point where it was banned for sale and use. All of Bridget's symptoms, including leg pain, weakness, deteriorating vision, loss of appetite, weight loss, and, of course, hair loss, indicated thallium poisoning. The problem was that Dr. LaPointe couldn't confirm his suspicions quickly. Nobody in the hospital had encountered such a case before, and there was no way to test the patient for poisoning. The samples had to be sent to another laboratory, and the results would be available in 3 days. 3 days that Bridget might not have. The race against time had begun. LaPointe started calling all the agencies, requesting an expedited analysis. But even if the doctor's suspicions proved to be correct and Bridget was suffering from thallium poisoning, the antidote would be urgently needed. However, obtaining the antidote, poetically named Berlin Blue, turned out to be more challenging than he could ever imagine. We have all seen Berlin Blue because it is a blue pigment used in paints. Vincent van Gogh used it when painting Starry Night over the Rhone. This substance is also an antidote for poisoning by certain heavy metals, accelerating their elimination from the body. However, while you can buy blue paint at the nearest art supply store, obtaining medical-grade Berlin blue is almost unrealistic. Lapointe called all the pharmacies, naval medical officers, clinics, but he found the antidote only at one warehouse, a classified warehouse in Los Angeles. The thing is, Berlin blue is also an antidote for radiation exposure, such as in the case of a dirty bomb explosion. Therefore, the government keeps meticulous records of every tube of Berlin blue in the country. And Dr. Lapointe couldn't count on getting the antidote until thallium poisoning was confirmed in the laboratory. When the toxicological analysis of Bridget's case arrived, Lapointe's worst fears were confirmed. The level of thallium in Bridget's body exceeded the permissible limit by 1,000 times. A hospital staff member drove all night to bring the antidote to San Diego. However, the doctor feared that with such a severe poisoning, one antidote might not be sufficient. He prescribed dialysis for the patient to cleanse her blood. It was a slow and painful process, and now all the medical staff and Bridget's family could do was wait and pray. Meanwhile, Bridget's husband and son were placed in another wing of the hospital to monitor their health. If she had been exposed to thallium, they could have been affected too. The main question remained, where could she have obtained such a large quantity of thallium? And the answer to that was being sought by FBI agents. It should be understood that all this was happening in a state with several military bases. Furthermore, these events unfolded against the backdrop of President Trump's planned visit. Therefore, when Dr. Lapointe started looking for Berlin blue, the FBI agents became very interested in what was happening in the city. FBI agents and police have discovered that several months ago, Bridget underwent treatment at an alternative medicine clinic in Mexico when she began experiencing an unexplained illness. The police investigated this lead but ultimately dismissed it. The school where Bridget taught was a former military base during World War II, where rodent poisoning could have occurred in the past. In that year, many teachers at the school fell ill. However, this lead also turned out to be a dead end. Investigators could not dismiss the possibility that Bridget had used thallium herself as a cry for attention due to her depression. But everyone who knew her claimed that she loved life and would never abandon her son. Furthermore, her depression emerged after the appearance of unexplained symptoms, not the other way around. Dr. Lapointe had his own suspicions about how his patient had been poisoned. He conducted a scan of Bridget's internal organs and was horrified to discover numerous white spots throughout her digestive tract. It became evident that the poison was entering her body through food. Someone close to her had attempted the perfect crime. Dr. Lapointe ordered complete isolation for the patient, allowing no one to visit her or provide her with food except what was provided by the hospital. However, at that moment, food was the least of her concerns. Bridget regained consciousness thanks to the antidote after a few days. All her hair had fallen out, and she couldn't sit or move, but she was alive. She couldn't name anyone who would wish her harm. However, the police knew that poisoning is always a personal crime committed by a close friend or family member. It was also interesting that Bridget's husband and child were unharmed. The police spoke with her sister, parents, and husband, all of whom were eager to help with the investigation. Ray wept and lamented that he couldn't switch places with his wife to relieve her suffering. He said what the detectives wanted to hear, yet investigators sensed falsehood in his words. The medical staff also noted that he didn't seem as concerned and asked strange and sometimes inappropriate questions. Response to the suspicion regarding her husband's involvement, Bridget became angered and vehemently denied it. She insisted that Ray had been caring for her when she was unwell, taking care of their son and bringing her to the hospital. Furthermore, he would prepare meals when she lacked the strength to get out of bed. However, during the conversation with Bridget, the investigators learned something that sent chills down their spines. Ray had a rather unusual hobby. He enjoyed collecting rare seeds of poisonous plants. This piqued the police's interest, And after 16 days of Bridget's hospitalization, the police gathered enough evidence to search their home.
Ray opened the door and appeared somewhat agitated. The detectives asked him to hand over all the family's gadgets, and he willingly surrendered all the phones and laptops. However, he couldn't help but notice that all the search histories on the devices had recently been cleared. Despite the supposedly deleted data on his phone, the police found 2 books in Ray's mobile, Criminal Poisoning and The Poisoner's Handbook. According to the Poisoner's Handbook, Thallium gives the poisoner the ability to control how quickly their victim dies. The poisoning presents itself as a medical enigma, with the patient slowly deteriorating for unknown reasons. There were even more intriguing discoveries. In Ray's car, they found a canister of acetone and a packet of exotic seeds hidden in a small compartment in the spare tire. Additionally, Bridget's sister handed over a black garbage bag that she retrieved from the trash bin, as their mother noticed Ray throwing it away just before the police arrived. Inside were receipts for exotic seeds such as tick seed, crea nut, and Cerbera odolum, along with various tools for their filtration and grinding. In other words, everything necessary for the production of rare poisons. It was evident that the man had already attempted to crush tick seeds to obtain ricin, a poison toxic to mice but dangerous to humans if inhaled or ingested. The detectives' suspicions grew, but there were no traces of thallium found in the house, garage, or car. Therefore, there was no basis for arresting Ray. All they could do was share their suspicions with Bridget and ask her not to return home. She still couldn't believe their words, but she didn't object to the continuation of the investigation. The investigators continued to dig deeper and discover the possible motive for the murder. Ray had a lover who believed he was a widower. He lied to her, claiming to be a Navy SEAL and expressing his goal to work for the FBI in the poisoning division. He didn't hesitate to bring his young son on their dates, and the boy had grown so attached to the woman that he called her mom. Leading a double life, Ray went even further and started another affair, confessing to the woman that he was married. However, he hoped that his wife would be hit by a bus, so he wouldn't have to share custody of their son. It's unclear why this didn't alarm the woman. Nonetheless, it was clear that the man wanted to end his relationship with Bridget. But as a devout Catholic, she had warned him before their marriage that she did not believe in divorce and that if they married, it would be for life. She could hardly have expected her unfaithful husband to take this ending so literally. The detectives asked Ray to undergo a polygraph test, which he failed miserably. When the polygraph examiner informed him of the results, he didn't attempt to deny it and confessed to everything. Race stated that he ordered thallium online 3 times. In August 2017, he first attempted to add it to his wife's food by preparing her a sandwich for breakfast. He calculated the amount of thallium based on her weight. The next day, Bridget felt unwell, but it didn't kill her. She started to recover. In December of the same year, Race added a slightly larger amount of thallium to the soup. Again, he didn't achieve the desired effect. In January, he increased the dosage 5-fold and once again hid the poison in a sandwich. He intended to kill Bridget within days. She felt terrible, experienced excruciating pain, and began losing her hair, but she continued to fight for her life. After confessing, Race was arrested. 8 months later, he pleaded guilty to 3 attempts to murder his wife. His lawyer tried to argue that Race suffered a spinal injury while serving in the Navy, and the pain clouded his judgment. However, this defense did not help. On March 14, 2019, he was sentenced to 3 life imprisonments ranging from 21 years to life. He may be eligible for parole in October 2033. If he is lucky and succeeds in his first attempt at freedom, he will serve only 14 years in prison and become a free man before his 42nd birthday. During the trial, Bridget was finally able to address her husband personally. She said, "I wanted to believe that I knew the man I married 3 years ago, the man I had been dating for nearly 10 years. I wanted to believe that he would never harm me."
I am horrified by the thought that he could be responsible for attempting to kill me. How could you do this to the mother of your child? Why do you think you have the right to decide that I am not a worthy mother for your son? How could you decide that the way to end our marriage is by slowly killing your wife, watching her suffer for months? I cared for you and I loved you. Every time Bridget recalls the incident, she breaks into a cold sweat. She felt unwell and was lying in bed. Her husband brought her a sandwich with peanut butter. Their little son climbed onto the bed and asked for a bit. Race immediately shouted at her not to give him any. Bridget doesn't know if there was thallium in that sandwich, but she believes her son was at least on the brink of severe poisoning. Despite Bridget's reluctance to admit divorce, she eventually divorced Race. She still suffers from constant fatigue, weakness in her legs, and nerve damage. However, she is gradually recovering and has returned to work at a school for children with special needs. She admits that now it is much easier for her to find an approach to each student. Bridget, who once couldn't walk, is now running again, trying skydiving, and striving to live life to the fullest. On March 1st, 2011, at 2 o'clock in the morning, Gisela Daoud heard her phone ringing. An unknown number appeared on the screen. It was a police officer from the city of Valence, asking if she was the mother of Samira Ben-Saad. She answered yes. Gisela couldn't understand why the police were looking for her 20-year-old daughter, Samira. She hadn't seen her for 3 days. The woman demanded an explanation of what was happening, but the police response did not calm her at all. The caller stated that they were searching for Samira because her boyfriend, 22-year-old Maël Combia, had gone missing. The police had discovered that the young couple had been dating for 8 months. However, Gisela knew nothing about the guy. Samira and Maël had met at a party. Samira Ben-Saad was a very beautiful woman who was aware of her attractiveness. She wanted to become a model and loved posing for photographs. Maël, in turn, was also a very nice and pleasant young man. There was an immediate mutual attraction between them, and they started seeing each other. However, on February 28, 2011, at 9:45 p.m., Maël's boss from the construction company contacted the police. He was worried because he hadn't heard from his employee for 3 days. On Saturday morning, the guy came to work and then his phone rang. He quickly got up and left without any explanation, and no one had seen him since. On Monday morning, his boss was surprised that he still hadn't shown up. They considered him a punctual and responsible employee, and it was the first time he didn't come to work. His boss found out that Maël wasn't answering calls from colleagues and friends, so he decided to contact the police. First, the police went to the guy's home in the city center of Valence, but it yielded no results because no one answered the doorbell. His car was not at the house either. On the same evening, the police talked to Maël's mother. She hadn't received any news from her son for 3 days and added that during their last meeting, he had behaved very unusually, being extremely emotional and tense. The woman mentioned that her son hugged and kissed her and said he loved her, something he had never done before. The details uncovered by the investigators seemed very suspicious. Maël and Samira disappeared on the same day without explaining anything to anyone and had not contacted their families for 3 days. It couldn't be a coincidence. One clue came from examining their phones. The investigators found out that Samira and Maël didn't just leave at the same time, but they left together in Maël's car. The phone pings revealed that on Saturday, in the middle of the day, they headed to Nice, and in the evening, they checked into a luxury hotel on the promenade. The investigators contacted the hotel and learned that there were surveillance cameras capturing 2 guys and a woman. The description perfectly matched Samira and Maël. They left Nice on Sunday morning and arrived in Livorno, 400 kilometers east of the border between France and Italy, by the evening. The young couple was clearly heading further into Italy, and the French police sought assistance from their Italian colleagues. Maël had booked a room in a prestigious hotel in Livorno. The hotel staff confirmed that a guy and a woman matching the description of the missing couple had stayed with them. So, Saturday evening was spent in Nice,
and the next day they headed to Livorno. Everything indicated that Samira and Mael had embarked on a spontaneous romantic journey, especially considering that the Riviera was conducive to such adventures. The detectives believed that the young couple would soon return home together, and they had no reason to doubt this theory, especially since Samira's mother received a message from her daughter stating that she had left, but there was no need to worry because she would return soon. It seemed like it should have been another confirmation that everything was fine with the young couple, but Gazella was certain that her daughter would never disappear just by impulsively leaving for a trip. Samira was a responsible woman who never missed work. There was another detail that troubled Gazella. She couldn't understand how her daughter, who loved being photographed and never left the house without meticulously applied makeup, styled hair, and carefully chosen clothes, could go away for several days with a young man without taking any belongings with her. She was also puzzled by the fact that Samira sent an SMS. The thing is, she would usually just call her mother. They were close and could talk for hours, so receiving a text message didn't calm her down. Instead, it only worried her even more. The next news about the case came from the city of Imperia, located in northern Italy, approximately 80 kilometers from Nice. On Monday, March 3, 2011, Massimo Bessone was on his way to work when he turned onto a small street to take a shortcut. Along the road, he noticed something strange. At first, he thought he saw a mannequin, but when he opened the door, he realized it was a woman. Massimo shouted something but received no response. However, the woman was clearly moving. He quickly called for an ambulance. Italian police determined that she was the missing French woman. Someone had shot her in the back of the head, and the bullet had lodged in her skull. The theory of a romantic trip could now be discarded. The French police were perplexed. Initially, it was a case of suspicious disappearance, then they thought it was a love-related escape, but now they were dealing with a girl who had been wounded in an attempted murder. Samira was alive but in critical condition. She was immediately taken to the hospital, and her mother was informed. When Gazella arrived at the hospital, she didn't even recognize her own daughter at first. It's difficult to describe the sight. Samira's head was shaved bald, and she resembled a 9-year-old child. The woman refused to believe that her daughter ended up in Italy with a bullet in her head. The doctors told the mother that there was little hope since the bullet was lodged in her daughter's skull. But Gazella didn't want to accept that and arranged for Samira to be transported to a hospital in Marseille. There, a surgeon informed her directly that he would perform the operation but wouldn't provide false hope. Even if the patient survived, she would never fully recover. Samira underwent a 10-hour operation. Although she made it through the surgery, when she opened her eyes, she didn't recognize anyone and couldn't speak. She had to relearn everything like a young child. While Samira couldn't tell anything about what happened in Italy, the police had to search for the culprit without her testimony. Many indications pointed to the crime being planned. She was found lying on the side of the road near a landfill, and the Italian police couldn't find any of her belongings. There was no purse, no phone, no passport. This indicated that the perpetrator wanted her to remain unidentified. However, the investigators had a lead. The last person Samira was seen with was her boyfriend, Mael Combia. The police believed that Mael crossed the border into Italy to commit the crime and then fled. However, he made a mistake by using his bank card in France after Samira was found. He used it at a first-class hotel in Les Tourrex, just 35 kilometers from his apartment in Valence. Surveillance cameras showed that Mael had returned to France a day earlier. But if he was innocent, why didn't he go home to his family? Instead, he stayed in a hotel just a few kilometers away. Soon, he made another mistake. Investigators discovered that he had used Samira's credit card. In other words, the young couple embarked on a spontaneous trip to another country where the woman nearly died, and Mael stayed in a hotel and used her card. Everything confirmed the police's worst suspicions. To search for a motive, the detective spoke with the family and friends of the young man. It became clear that Samira and Mael's relationship was far from perfect. Samira was a very beautiful woman, and many men showed interest in her,
which bothered Mael. Their arguments often escalated into physical violence. Mael could slap Samira in front of their friends, and there was even an incident where he extinguished a cigarette on her. Obviously, he couldn't be considered a very stable person, but the question of the motive remained open. Did Mael act in a fit of rage, or was everything planned in advance? All their friends knew that Samira was infatuated with Mael despite his behavior. However, she recently found out that her boyfriend was married. He had gotten married to his girlfriend at the age of 18 and frequently cheated on her. Samira was far from being his only mistress. She was angered by the revelation but didn't break up with him because she believed Mael's claim that they were in the process of divorce and living separately. Upon discovering this, the investigator went to Mael's home, but as soon as he entered, he realized that Samira was mistaken and the husband and wife were clearly living together. Furthermore, Mael was soon to become a father. The apartment had 17 ultrasound photos with the name Combia written on them. It was evident that Mael, his wife, and Samira were involved in a love triangle, and one of them was destined to disappear. It was necessary to find Mael, and it turned out to be much easier than the police had anticipated. Mael Combia surrendered himself 5 days after the disappearance, appearing at the Valence police station on March 4th. This was an incredible stroke of luck for the investigation. Mael not only came to the station voluntarily but also directly confessed that he was the one who shot Samira. He then proceeded to recount what had happened. The young man claimed that Samira was just an acquaintance with whom he could spend pleasant time. Their relationship had no future, and she knew it. Mael explained that their romance had come to an end, but Samira couldn't accept it. She didn't give him a moment's peace, constantly calling him and sometimes dialing his number 150 times in a single day. He showed the investigator his phone, which displayed evidence that Samira had called him approximately 1,000 times in a month. Mael's words confirmed that Samira's behavior could be classified as stalking. But could this be considered a justification for shooting her? Soon, the situation escalated to the point where the young man feared for his life. He recounted what happened on the Friday evening before their departure to Italy. Samira confronted him in a nightclub while he was kissing another woman. She stormed out of the club, scratched his car with her key, and they began arguing, which escalated into a fight with Samira's cousins. This incident terrified Mael because they claimed to have weapons and threatened to kill him. Mael was in a panic. He quickly got into his car and left the nightclub, deciding that he needed to come up with a way to protect himself in the future. The idea of acquiring a weapon for his own defense crossed his mind. The next day, when he received the call, he impulsively left and went to buy a revolver. However, all of this still didn't explain why he shot Samira. Mael explains that he didn't go to Italy to kill her or commit any other terrible act. He simply wanted to put an end to their troubled relationship. He drove Samira to Italy to calm down their heated emotions and explain everything to her. But things didn't go as planned. They argued again in the car, and Mael got out. Samira followed him. According to Mael, he grabbed the weapon with the intention of scaring her but had no intention to shoot. However, the revolver went off accidentally. Afterward, he left her lying on the ground, got back into the car, and drove away. When asked why he didn't call for an ambulance, he said he was scared when she fell. He went into hiding for several days because he didn't know what to do. The rest of the story was already known to the police. Overall, the man claims that he was the victim of his obsessive lover's pursuit, and what happened in Italy was an accident. He was arrested for attempted murder, but his explanation didn't fully convince the police. Some pieces didn't fit together. Why would someone travel to another country and stay in a luxury hotel just to end a relationship? Why did he take all her personal belongings and then use her credit card? And who sent the message to Samira's mother from her daughter's phone? The investigator had no doubt that the young man was lying, but it was difficult to prove without Samira's testimony. Fortunately, over time and with therapy, Samira was able to provide her testimony. At first,
With a weak voice and very slowly, Samira began to speak. On October 11, 2011, 8 months after the attack, she recounted her version of events.
Samira's words contradicted the claims of her former lover. He came to her home, stating that they needed to talk. She didn't want to, but he insisted, so she relented. Maëlle invited her for a weekend getaway. She asked where he wanted to go, and he replied, Spain. This didn't sit well with her, so he took her to Nice instead, and from there, they went to Italy. After 2 days of leisure, on the 3rd day of the trip, Maëlle unexpectedly veered off the road. When asked why he turned onto a road leading to a landfill, he reassured her not to worry because he simply needed to dispose of something. Maëlle stopped the car and got out. He opened the passenger side door for her to exit and retrieved a revolver. Pointing it at her, he declared that she would die. "Shoot if you're a man," she exclaimed, and he fired the gun. On February 7, 2012, a year after the attack on Samira, forensic experts found the revolver, and this discovery completely refuted Maëlle's claims. According to his version, the gun in his hand unexpectedly went off. However, ballistic analysis showed that such an event could not have occurred. The expert explained that before firing, the shooter needs to carefully prepare, pull the trigger back and then shoot, which involves 2 distinct actions. You cannot simply wave your hand for the revolver to fire. Furthermore, to pull the trigger of the revolver backward, one needs to hold the weapon with one hand and apply significant force to accomplish the action with the other hand. Accidentally firing such a firearm was utterly impossible. Maëlle Combia lie. He wanted to kill Samira, and after several months of investigation, detectives were able to reconstruct the plan that the murderer had conceived. On February 26, 2011, at 9 a.m., Maëlle left work. He was determined to avoid a repeat of the previous night's scene at all costs, so he purchased a weapon. Heading to the woods, he tested it, loaded it, pulled the trigger, and fired. He had planned everything. After a romantic weekend in Italy, Samira was supposed to disappear on the other side of the border. Italy served as the perfect country to commit the crime since he had no connections there. Driving off the road, Maëlle pulled the woman out of the car, declared he would kill her, and shot her. Then he took her belongings to prevent her identification. Returning to France, Maëlle attempted to mislead the police by sending an SMS to Samira's mother. Everyone was supposed to believe that the woman had gone on a trip and was still alive. The guy believed he had committed the perfect crime and was confident that he would never be caught. Imagine his surprise when he discovered that his victim had survived. While the police were searching for him, he spent 5 days hiding near his hometown, contemplating his next actions. He lacked the means and useful connections to escape, so he devised a new strategy for self-defense. Maëlle Combia decided to go to the police and present his version of events. On February 10, 2014, the trial of Maëlle began in the city of Valence. The trial was a real ordeal for the victim and her family. To their immense surprise, Maëlle did not deviate from his version of events. He insisted that he was the victim in this case, and Samira had been harassing him, and everything that happened in Italy was an unfortunate accident. His friends stated that he had never been an aggressive person and purchased the revolver out of fear after threats from Samira's cousins, who had threatened to destroy his apartment, car, and kill Maëlle himself. He hid nothing and went on a trip to Italy in his own car, taking his phone with him. He simply wanted to take the woman on a trip to calm her down, as he was emotionally exhausted from Samira's constant call. It is also worth noting that Maëlle conducted himself with exaggerated politeness and respect during the trial, effortlessly charming the jury, and his strategy paid off. He was sentenced to 13 years of imprisonment. The lenient sentence made many wonder if there was a connection between Maëlle's behavior in court and the relatively short duration of the sentence chosen by the jury. After all, people often associate criminals with unpleasant personalities, and it is difficult for them to convict a charming young man with excellent manners. Samira considers this punishment too lenient, as by the time he turns 40, he will be a free man able to live a normal life, while she will forever remain bound to a wheelchair simply because she loved a man who decided to kill her. The surgeon explained that during 1 year of therapy, Samira regained 80% of her abilities, after which the effectiveness of rehabilitation sharply declined, leaving her dependent on the help of others for the rest of her life. She admits that she was willing to do anything for love, and this is how he repaid her. On Thursday, July 19, 1990, residents of Florida, Steve and Jane MacGowan, received a letter from their 34-year-old sister, Beverly. She bid them farewell and wrote that she was embarking on a journey to find herself in this world. Beverly added that she was quitting her job and selling her apartment because she intended to leave immediately. The contents of the letter deeply shocked the brother and sister. Beverly had worked hard and was satisfied with both her job and her new home. She had recently acquired the apartment she had dreamed of and worked 2 jobs to pay off the mortgage. Jane hurried to the police station to report her sister's disappearance, but the authorities could do little since the letters stated that Beverly had left of her own accord. The letters were written in Beverly's handwriting on notepad sheets found at her home. So Steve and Jane went home to Beverly in Pompano Beach to try and find answers to their questions. They immediately noticed that Beverly's red Volkswagen Fox was not in its usual parking spot. Beverly herself was not in the apartment, but it did not give the impression that she had packed up and left for good. There were dirty dishes in the sink, a nightshirt lay on the unmade bed, and clothes hung in the closet. However, there were also signs that Beverly had no intention of returning. The phone was disconnected, the answering machine was missing, and there was no sign of her 2 cats. Steve and Jane rummaged through drawers and discovered that Beverly's passport, birth certificate, and address book were also missing. Beverly worked in the loan department of a bank and had a part-time job at a non-profit organization. Steve contacted the bank to see if her colleagues could shed light on the situation. They informed him that the day before he received the farewell letter, Beverly had taken a sick day, citing illness. This was unusual considering Beverly's reputation as a responsible and reliable employee. During the phone call, she also mentioned that she no longer wanted to live in her apartment and asked them to sell the mortgaged property and get rid of her personal belongings left in the apartment. Beverly was asked to send a telegram confirming her request, and such a telegram was indeed received. Although the circumstances were strange, Steve and Jane had to believe that their sister had truly left without explaining herself to anyone. However, Steve managed to convince the police to file a missing person report, and he closed Beverly's credit cards. He reasoned that closing the cards would disrupt her travel plans and anger her enough to compel her to contact the family. On the same evening that Steve and Jane were inspecting their sister's apartment, a fisherman and his young niece went to search for bait for an upcoming fishing trip. They arrived at a wide irrigation canal located 160 kilometers north of Pompano Beach in a remote area of St. Lucie County. Leaving his niece in the car, the fisherman began walking along the canal when he noticed something that appeared to be a bag of trash. As he approached closer and realized what it was, he hurried back to the car and contacted the police. Deputies from the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office, who arrived at the location indicated by the fisherman, discovered the body of a woman. It was evident that the perpetrator not only took her life, but also made every effort to prevent her from being identified. However, he overlooked something. On the woman's right ankle, hidden beneath her jeans, there was a small tattoo of a yellow rose. The description of the tattoo was released to the media in the hopes that local residents could identify it. Steve MacGowan had already returned home when the phone rang around 10 p.m. It was a friend of his missing sister. She had just heard the news about the discovery in the St. Lucie Canal and the matching tattoo that Beverly had. The next day, Steve and Jane went to St. Lucie to speak with investigators and show them a photograph of their sister's tattoo. Due to the condition of the body, traditional identification methods had to be ruled out, but both of them were confident that it was their Beverly. Dental records comparison confirmed that it was indeed her. The inspection of Beverly's apartment did not reveal any blood or suspicious items. There were no signs of a struggle. Steve and Jane couldn't understand who would harm their sister. She loved her family, especially her nephews, and they loved her. Beverly was not wealthy and was not involved in complicated relationships. Her life was overshadowed by the fact that her two boyfriends died in separate car accidents. However, despite her past, Steve was confident that Beverly had been quite content with her life recently. Although Beverly worked 2 jobs, it was not enough to cover her mortgage payments. To increase her income, she started renting out one of the bedrooms in her apartment. During the search of her apartment, investigators found a notebook with a list of potential tenants. Each entry included the full name, phone number, and the scheduled time for viewing the apartment. Except for one. The first line only had the name Alice and was marked for Tuesday at 6:30. After meeting Alice, Beverly spoke highly of her. The woman had come from London, dressed impeccably, drove an impressive car, and worked for the renowned company IBM. Alice had moved to the region because she was temporarily transferred to the company's office in Fort Lauderdale. She had impressed Beverly to the point that she chose her as the new neighbor and informed her friend that Alice would be moving in on Friday, July 20th. By the way, Beverly mentioned that Alice introduced her to numerology. Alice attempted to predict Beverly's future, but she needed various numbers that held significance in Beverly's life, such as her date of birth, passport number, social security number, and even details from her driver's license. Strangely enough, Beverly provided her with all of these numbers. Overall, she was satisfied with Alice's predictions about her future and shared them with her friends. Unfortunately, she did not share the last name of her new neighbor with them. Alice's identity remained a mystery. Additionally, there was no evidence to suggest that Alice had moved in or even visited Beverly's apartment. The investigators reached out to IBM, where they were informed that they had no employees from the UK working in the South Florida area. They didn't even have an office in Fort Lauderdale. The investigation into Beverly's finances revealed that on the day her body was found, someone withdrew $795 out of the $800 that was in her bank account. Her credit card was then used to purchase women's clothing and books at a shopping center in Miami. The salespeople who served the customer described her as a bright blonde with a British accent. The description matched that of a tall blonde woman who had attracted nationwide attention at the time. 8 years earlier, in 1992, police officer Lori Bembinek had been sentenced to life in prison for the murder of her ex-husband's former wife. The case had caused a sensation. Lori's glamorous appearance combined with the high-profile nature of the case made her somewhat of a celebrity. A few days before Beverly's murder, Lori had escaped from prison in Wisconsin. When the Miami salesperson was shown photographs of Lori Bembinek, they recognized her as the woman who had used Beverly's credit card. The police were puzzled as to how the convicted killer's path could have crossed with that of a modest bank employee until it was discovered that Lori had actually fled to Canada and was not in Florida at the time of the crime. However, on Friday, July 20th, one day after Beverly's body was discovered, her card was used again in Miami, this time at a travel agency. The card holder had a notable appearance. It appeared to be a man dressed as a woman. The person wore a cheap black wig in the style of Cleopatra and oval-shaped glasses. The man spoke with a British accent and introduced himself as Sam. Apparently, Sam was planning to fly to London in 2 days, on July 22nd, and used the card to purchase a ticket for British Airways Flight 92. Detectives examined the passenger registration records for Flight 292, as well as all other flights heading to Britain on July 22nd. Beverly MacGowan's name was not on any of them. However, Beverly's car was found in the airport parking lot, where it had been parked for 5 days. Fingerprints found inside the car yielded no significant results, but 4 synthetic black wig hairs were discovered. British Airways Flight 292 arrived at Heathrow Airport on Monday, July 23rd, according to London time. After landing,
A passenger with short black hair and oval glasses approached the Avis car rental counter. The passenger, presumably Sam, booked a car in Beverly MacGowan's name and handed over her driver's license as proof. Beverly had shoulder-length dark hair and wore glasses. The person at the counter resembled her. The clerk asked for a credit card to pay for the car's fuel, and Sam handed over Beverly's Visa card, but the card was declined. Sam explained that they might have exceeded the limit and paid in cash. In reality, by that time, Beverly's brother Steve had cancelled her credit cards. When Florida detectives learned about this unsuccessful transaction, Sam had long disappeared. Since the credit card was no longer active, its transactions could not be traced. Sam's arrival in Britain meant that he was beyond the jurisdiction of American law enforcement agencies. Florida detectives contacted the London police to request their assistance. Detective John Cornish agreed to help with the international investigation. He spoke with the Avis company and instructed their staff to direct the suspect to their nearest office if he contacted them. Later that same week, Sam did contact Avis. He requested an extension on the car rental, and he was asked to visit the nearby Avis office. The police waited for him at the location, but Sam never showed up. A backup plan was devised, where officers would wait at Heathrow Airport on the day of the car's return. That day arrived, but Sam once again failed to appear. In the early morning hours, Sam's abandoned car was found a few miles from the airport, devoid of any clues. Suspecting that Sam might be attempting to fly back to the United States, Detective Cornish ordered his team to board all flights heading to the US on that day to check the passengers, but this endeavor proved futile. The police missed the opportunity to apprehend the criminal. The only lead the police had left was British Airways Flight 292. Since Sam didn't use Beverly's passport to board the flight, it meant he had booked a ticket under a different name. Investigators attempted to examine the 248 passengers on that flight, but by law, they were not allowed to check passengers who didn't reside in Florida. Therefore, they sought assistance from the U.S. State Department in Washington, D.C. Each passenger's name had to be compared with passport details, and since there was no unified database that consolidated all this information, the process could take years. It wasn't until January 1996 that the State Department provided the police with a name they deemed important. Sylvia Ann Hodgkinson, a British citizen, was on Flight 292. The photo in her passport depicted a woman with dark hair and eyebrows. After her husband's death, she was forced to move into a women's shelter if she had nowhere else to go. Less than a year after her husband's death, a passport was issued in her name. Investigators suspected that someone else had impersonated Sylvia to obtain documents in her name. Since they couldn't locate Sylvia in any way, there was concern that she had suffered a fate similar to Beverly's. The State Department also discovered an intriguing connection between Sylvia and two other women, Charlotte Ray Cowan and Elaine Antoinette Parrot. All three identities turned out to be inadvertently linked after an incident that occurred a year after Beverly's murder. On May 22, 1991, North Miami police approached a woman in a rented car. The car had been rented 6 months earlier in Los Angeles and was overdue for return. Stolen license plates were attached to the car to conceal its origin. Inside the car sat a tall, red-haired woman who identified herself as Charlotte Ray Cowan and presented her documents to the officers. It was clear that Charlotte had been staying in the car with 2 dogs. Several wigs, the woman's personal diary, and a number of documents with Charlotte's photograph but different names, Sylvia Hodgkinson and Elaine Parrot, were found in the car. The police arrested Charlotte based on her failure to return the rented car. She spent a night in jail and posted bail the next day. Remarkably, despite the woman's obvious use of false identities, the police took no action regarding this matter. On the day of Charlotte's court hearing for the offense, one of the arresting officers was present in the building. When it was time for Charlotte to appear before the court, a redhead woman stood up. However, The officer who had arrested Charlotte was shocked. The woman summoned to court by the subpoena was not the same woman he had taken into custody. Charlotte herself couldn't understand why she had suddenly received a court summons. She asked the officer if the woman he had arrested was tall and a redhead. When he answered yes, she confidently stated that she knew exactly who it was. Nearly 10 years earlier, in the mid-80s, Charlotte was relaxing at a bar in Orlando when an elegantly dressed woman with a British accent approached her. She had short red hair, like Charlotte, and amazing blue eyes. The woman introduced herself as Anne Tremont and offered to buy Charlotte a drink. Charlotte accepted the offer, and they engaged in casual conversation. During their chat, Anne casually brought up the topic of numerology. She mentioned that she would be happy to create a corresponding matrix for Charlotte and started by asking for her date of birth. One by one, Anne extracted Charlotte's social security number and driver's license details. She jotted everything down on a napkin and gave Charlotte a positive prediction about her future. Anne and Charlotte became instant friends and started communicating. A few days later, Charlotte met Anne's brother, a tall blonde man with the same elegant demeanor as his sister. However, over time, the women saw less of each other until they completely lost touch. So Charlotte was quite surprised when, several months later, Anne called her and said that her aunt had passed away, leaving her a significant inheritance. Anne was supposed to share the money with her brother but claimed that he had decided to have her institutionalized to claim all the money for himself. About a month after the phone call, Anne appeared on Charlotte's doorstep at 3 a.m. She had a mustache, wig, and a man's shirt with a tie. Sobbing, she explained that she had escaped from the institution where her brother had placed her. She was hiding from her family and needed help to disappear. Anne begged Charlotte to allow her to take her birth certificate so that she could create a new identity for herself. Initially, Charlotte refused, but she reluctantly agreed when she saw how distraught Anne was. Her friend promised to return the birth certificate soon. Weeks passed, and Charlotte heard nothing from Anne. She began to worry. Then, finally, she received a letter with the birth certificate and a note from Anne, apologizing for the delay. Charlotte didn't hear anything more about her friend until the moment she received a court summons in 1991. Hearing this fascinating story, the investigators became intrigued by the identity of the elusive and enigmatic fraudster, Elaine Parrot. Like others, Parrot was a real person, but little was known about her life. She was born in the Bronx, New York, on August 4, 1942. She was the only child of loving and fairly affluent parents. By the time she reached adulthood, she had transformed into a tall, slender beauty with dark hair and piercing blue eyes. At the age of 30, she moved to Florida and worked for a while at a real estate agency until her arrest in 1976 in Fort Lauderdale for shoplifting. Her fingerprints were taken and stored in the database. Then, in 1985, she stole jewelry worth $40,000 from an elderly acquaintance. This was around the same time Parrot met Charlotte. Parrot's fingerprints were compared to those of the woman arrested in 1991 for failing to return a rented car. They matched. The woman masquerading as Charlotte Coven was Elaine Parrot. Naturally, the conclusion was drawn that the new neighbor, Beverly MacGowan Ellis, the elusive suspect Sam, and Elaine Parrot were one and the same person. However, they still needed to directly link Elaine to Beverly's murder. The detectives reviewed the evidence in the case and examined a notebook containing letters Beverly had written to her brother and sister using an electrostatic detection device, ESDA. This specialized equipment is used to detect indentations or impressions on paper left by previously written letters. The analysis of the notebook revealed that it had been used for a series of other letters written not in Beverly's handwriting. It seemed the author was a woman who held a strong grudge against Beverly. The messages were rather aggressive and contained threats. The letters were compared to handwriting samples from Elaine Parrot, and they matched. The letters written by Parrot were addressed to a woman in London who held a high-ranking position as the CEO of a major company. For her safety in the case materials, she was referred to as Witness X. She shed light on many gaps in the life of the elusive fraudster. The woman revealed that she had met Elaine during a trip to Miami in the 1980s, and they quickly became friends. In 1985, when the police were searching for Elaine for the jewelry theft, she apparently fled to London and asked Witness X if she could stay with her. However, the two young women soon realized that they couldn't live together due to Elaine's explosive temperament and instability. In 1990, the con artist returned to the United States, but to Witness X's surprise, she returned to London at the end of July. She was driving a car rented from Ives. 3 months after her return to London, Parrot stole 2 dogs belonging to her former friend and escaped to the United States. From there, she sent threatening letters to Witness X and attempted to extort a ransom for her dogs. These dogs were evidently the same ones found in her possession during her arrest in Miami in 1991. By the end of 1996, Parrot faced charges of passport forgery from the State Department, but they have no idea where she could be hiding. In 1998, the television show America's Most Wanted aired an episode about Elaine Parrot. When the show began, Patricia Nevins from St. Petersburg, Florida, was at home watching television. As soon as she saw Elaine's photo, she immediately recognized her. Patricia Nevins was a church worker and knew Elaine as a blonde named Sandra Little. Patricia met Sandra Little in 1992 when she was living in a homeless shelter in St. Petersburg. Patricia allowed Sandra to stay in her vacant bedroom, and she remained with her for almost 1.5 years. During this period, Sandra filed a lawsuit against a restaurant where she slipped and injured herself. She won the case and received compensation, the amount of which is undisclosed. Patricia described several curious incidents that occurred while she lived with Elaine. Elaine once told her that one way for her to lead a dignified life was to assume a different identity. Then, during a dinner party, Parrot mimed cutting a guest's hand to steal a gold bracelet. Patricia arranged for Elaine to speak with a psychiatrist, who later informed Patricia that Elaine was an extremely intelligent sociopath who would leave Patricia's life as quickly as she entered it. This prediction came true when the women went their separate ways in 1993. After the police publicly appealed to the community to help capture Elaine, an intriguing letter was delivered to the office of the St. Lucie County Sheriff. Inside was a copy of a painting done in oil colors. It depicted Elaine Parrot wearing a teal-green swimsuit and pearl earrings. Her hair was grey and styled in the same manner Parrot often chose. She was portrayed coming out of a pool. On the back, it was printed, "Best wishes, your chameleon." Psychiatrist Barbara Cavan, who had been assisting the police in the case, stated that Parrot both desperately needed and feared police attention. The painting is very telling. She sent it to the police to taunt them, as if to say, "I'm alive, I'm okay, look for me, but you'll never find me." In February 1999, Elaine was featured in the documentary series World's Most Wanted, which brought her international attention. Reports poured in from around the world claiming to have seen Parrot in Turkey, France, Australia, and South Africa. The press dubbed her the most wanted woman in the world. In April 2002, America's Most Wanted aired another episode about Elaine Parrot. Following the program, numerous calls came in from the affluent neighborhood of Panama City, Florida, claiming that a woman living there was Elaine. 3 police officers were dispatched to the address. They arrived at a modest single-story house and knocked on the door. A middle-aged brunette woman, dressed in a beige silk pajama set, answered the door. The officers explained why they had come to see her. The woman introduced herself as Darlene Thompson and presented them with her military ID, which featured her photograph. She did not resemble the photograph of Elaine Parrot that the officers had seen. Realizing that the neighbors had made a mistake, the officers nevertheless asked her to accompany them to the station for formalities.
Darlene agreed and requested that the officers wait while she changed clothes. While the officers waited outside the bedroom, one of them examined Darlene's ID. Being a former military personnel, he immediately noticed a crucial missing stamp that confirmed the document's authenticity. The officer knocked on the bedroom door to clarify this matter, to which she responded that she was getting dressed. The officers waited for her to come out, but she never appeared. A gunshot rang out, and the officers rushed into the bedroom only to find Darlene dead. Subsequent fingerprint analysis officially confirmed that Darlene and Elaine Parrot were the same person. It turned out that the house where Elaine lived belonged to another woman. Elaine had been renting a room from her since August 2001. The homeowner described her as a pleasant woman with a passion for cooking. During the search of the house, Elaine's Florida driver's license was found, featuring her photo but under the name of the woman she was staying with. In a notebook, she had written down information about a man from the neighboring town of Lynn Haven, including his social security number and credit cards. Elaine's closet was filled with wigs and both women's and men's clothing. A book on learning the French language and another on theatrical makeup were also discovered. Some acquaintances of Elaine mentioned that she often worked on a laptop, but it was never found. The diary she had with her when she was arrested over 10 years ago as Charlotte Cavan was also missing. Another intriguing detail to the portrait emerged. The police found a flyer with a photograph of Elaine and the name Antonia Racemen. The flyer stated that she was being sought by the FBI for the murder of a government official at a hotel in Washington. Interestingly, it appeared that Elaine had created the flyer herself, and the local police chief later speculated that she had made it to intimidate someone. The death of Elaine left many unanswered questions. The police believe she had up to 20 different identities that she used across the world, including the USA, UK, Turkey, Israel, France, and South Africa. Some suspect that she may have committed more murders, but no additional victims have been found. 3 years prior to her death, investigator Norma Pfeiffer told the media, "The brutality of the Maguire murder makes me think that someone capable of this has either done it before or will do it again." Opinions are divided as to whether she worked alone or had an accomplice. Some argued that she couldn't have managed Beverly on her own. And let's not forget about the attractive blonde man she presented as her brother. Psychologist Barbara Kerwin described Elaine as a virtuoso in her field, capable of effortlessly reading people's souls and uncovering their vulnerable spots. However, the motive behind her crimes remains completely unclear. Why would someone with Elaine's high intellect choose to engage in criminal activities instead of achieving great heights in any other field, especially considering that her crimes brought her more infamy than wealth? But Kerwin believes she knows the reason behind Elaine's schemes. She was driven by her own psychological demons. Barbara stated, "I believe she impulsively stole the identities of others to fill her own emptiness." Late spring of 1995, Aurora, 26 years old, and Mark, 32 years old, chose the beautiful Corsican island for their honeymoon. Aurora and Mark got married 2 months ago, and the girl picked this place for their first vacation together. The young wife wanted to explore Corsica, its mountains, villages, and picturesque landscapes. On that day, they stopped in the cozy little town of Calvi. Here, the newlyweds had a candlelit dinner in the harbor at a restaurant overlooking the bay. After dinner, Aurora and Mark headed towards the Notre Dame de la Serra Chapel. It is a popular spot among tourists where lovers go to enjoy the sunset. An ideal place for a romantic end to the day. Later in the evening, around 10:30, they got into the car to return to the hotel. The young couple had to drive on a very dangerous road that sharply descended. And right at the point where the railing ended, some animal suddenly jumped onto the road in front of the car. Mark quickly turned the wheel, and the car went off the cliff. Despite the extreme situation, Aurora didn't panic. She opened the door and jumped out of the car just before it fell. Mark wasn't as fortunate. He plummeted 140 meters along with the car. Aurora was in shock, but she was alive. She made a daring decision. In the middle of the night, in pitch darkness, she descended barefoot to help her husband. Aurora found Mark in the car and pulled him out. She dragged him by the legs towards the sea and washed his face. Then, the girl climbed back up the cliff to stop a passing car and call for help. The firefighters from Calvi 1 arrived at the scene. Aurora was in hysterics, screaming and crying that her husband was down there, with a head injury and unconscious. She begged the rescuers to descend as quickly as possible and save him. The firefighters immediately headed towards the base of the cliff to find Mark, but the darkness of the night and the uneven terrain significantly hindered their search. It took them half an hour just to locate the car. It turned out to be empty. However, they noticed a lot of blood and signs indicating that the man had a severe head injury. After several hours of relentless searching, the exhausted firefighters were ready to give up when, at 6 a.m., divers signaled that they had found something. Mark's body was floating in the water right next to the car at a depth of 3 meters. They brought his body to the surface. Unfortunately, it was too late for the newlywed. The police compiled a report on another unfortunate incident on that stretch of road and closed the case. Mark's body was transported to his native Belgium. The young widow was utterly devastated. She couldn't cope with the grief on her own, and she was hospitalized in a specialized clinic for several days. Mark's relatives rushed to console her, but she shut herself off from the world, declaring that she didn't want to see anyone. Mark's family understood her state of mind and didn't insist. After all, at the age of 26, she had lost her husband during their honeymoon. But in the following days, her behavior intrigued Mark's family more and more. Gradually, concern gave way to suspicion. Aurora insisted on having her husband cremated, but his parents vehemently opposed the idea. On the day of the funeral, she shocked the family even further by leaving the farewell ceremony earlier than expected. Since then, the relationship between her and Mark's family became increasingly complicated. Upon returning to the family home, she changed the locks and didn't even let her mother-in-law, who had come to collect a few of her son's inexpensive but sentimental belongings, inside. In the following weeks, Aurora put the house up for sale. The sale of the house provided her with a sum equivalent to 125,000 euros. But that wasn't all. It turned out she had received 7 insurance payouts after her husband's death. In total, Aurora received 475,000 euros. Shocked by such behavior from their daughter-in-law, the Van Ba couple decided to take legal action and filed a complaint regarding the suspicious death, prompting the coroner to demand an investigation into the circumstances of Mark's death. To understand what actually happened that evening, investigators began by studying the lives of the couple. Approximately a year before the incident, in April 1994, 31-year-old Mark Van Ba was working at a respected financial company in Brussels. He had a wonderful job, loving parents, and friendly colleagues, and it seemed like everything in his life was going well, or almost everything. However, he had not yet met a woman with whom he wanted to spend his life. Mark was at the age when he wanted to start a family. Mark and Aurora met at a bar in Brussels. At that time, Aurora was going from door to door selling ironing boards. It was not a very profitable job. The chemistry between Mark and Aurora was instant. Mark immediately fell in love with the beautiful girl and was crazy about her. The men's friends were envious and amazed by their vibrant relationship. Aurora was very attractive, fit, and sporty, while Mark was slightly overweight, not interested in sports, and quite shy. Yet, just a few weeks after their first meeting, Aurora moved in with Mark. The future husband's family warmly welcomed her, seeing that their son was happy with her and accepting her as their future daughter-in-law and the mother of their grandchildren. No one was surprised when the young couple decided to get married after a year. The girl set several conditions for her future husband, such as asking Mark to put half of the house in her name. This might have seemed unusual or inappropriate, but Mark, deeply in love, agreed to all of the bride's terms. On March 11, 1995, the young couple said yes to each other. The husband's entire family attended the wedding, while only the bride's twin sister was present from her side. Gradually, the husband's family began to notice that their daughter-in-law never talked about her family, evasively answering all questions about her relatives, her past, or her education. She pretended to come from a more privileged family than theirs. On September 5, 1996, more than a year after Mark's death, Aurora was invited to the police station for questioning. She confirmed the statement she had previously made. She and Mark had visited a restaurant in the port and then went to a chapel. On the way back, a wild animal suddenly jumped in front of their car. Mark turned the steering wheel, and an unfortunate accident occurred. Right before the car fell off the cliff, Aurora opened the door and jumped out. The police were unable to extract any further information from her. In an attempt to uncover the truth, Mark's body was exhumed on October 8, 1996. The forensic expert noted that some of the injuries were inflicted post-mortem. Numerous wounds were found on the body, but none were bleeding. This indicates that Mark died before the car fell off the cliff. The police wanted to question the widow again, but could not locate her anywhere. The detectives then decided to investigate the crime scene in Corsica. 2 years after the incident, Belgian police officers found themselves at the edge of the ravine where the newlyweds' car had plunged. Without the car, and armed only with photographs, the task became more challenging. Nonetheless, the expert was able to reconstruct the trajectory of the car before the fall. When something happens on the road, like an animal unexpectedly running out, a person reacts by turning the steering wheel but not by a full 90 degrees. If the car veered off the road, it should have fallen into the water, and under no circumstances could it have ended up where it was found. Additionally, the expert noticed another inconsistency with the accident theory. According to the firefighters who arrived at the scene, the bushes growing on the top of the cliff were crushed. If the car had quickly descended, the bushes would have been severed. The crushed vegetation indicated that the car had stayed on the bushes for some time before slowly rolling down. Furthermore, between the car and the water, after the incident, drops of blood were found that were unevenly distributed, suggesting that the body was carried, not dragged. Could Aurora, weighing less than 50 kilograms, have carried an 80 kilograms man? The findings of the investigation did not align with Aurora's version of events. The experts' conclusions were definitive. The car was pushed off the cliff. Now, the investigators wanted to understand what happened after the incident. Did Aurora descend to health Mark? Did she find the strength and courage to climb down the rocks barefoot? As difficult as it may be to believe, it was possible. Aurora Martin was a champion rock climber, a trained athlete, so the police couldn't easily refute the possibility that she actually descended to help her husband. It was a dead end for them. Still having no news about the young woman, the investigators decided to delve deeper into her past. Who is she really? What secrets does she hide behind her evasive answers? In reality, the girl had a very difficult childhood where there was no place for a loving family or a proper education. When she was 12 years old, her parents divorced, and her mother moved to Germany, and the daughter rarely saw her. She lived a carefree life with her father and 2 sisters. Her father was hardly involved in her life, and when the girl turned 18, she left her childhood home with grandiose dreams. Aurora wanted to become a model and participated in beauty contests, but without much success. So, she found work as a hostess in a bar, sometimes working as a model for an escort service. In February 1993, Aurora was 24 years old and lived life to the fullest, leveraging her beauty. One fine day, as usual, she went to a rock climbing club where a fateful encounter awaited her. Peter Schuett. He was rich, young, handsome, and shared her passion for mountaineering. He was 23 and she was 24. It was love at first sight. Next to Peter, Aurora was able to turn the page on her past life. This story seemed too miraculous to be true. Indeed, while investigating Peter's past, the investigators uncovered an unusual fact for a young man of his age. Peter Schuett was a widower. His wife had died under suspicious circumstances. It happened 2 years prior when Peter turned 21 and was serving in the German army stationed in Belgium. Peter enjoyed frequenting clubs, and one evening, while hanging out with friends, he met a young student named Ursula Deschamps. Their romance was fast-paced, and within 3 months, Peter put a ring on her finger. However, Ursula quickly discovered that Peter couldn't be satisfied with just one woman. There were other surprises awaiting her. Ursula found large sums of cash and forged documents at their home. She wanted to report her findings to the police. Tensions grew in their young marriage, and they decided to get a divorce. But on the evening of August 29, 1992, Peter and Ursula got into a convertible and set off on a trip during which Peter was supposed to teach his wife how to drive. It was a strange outing for soon-to-be ex-spouses. Peter was behind the wheel and, as usual, driving very fast. He lost control, and the car plunged into a canal at high speed. Peter managed to escape in time but couldn't save his wife, who drowned along with the car. He recalled that he even touched her hand and couldn't hold onto her to pull her to the surface. Ursula's body was found several days later. The autopsy revealed nothing that would cast doubt on the fact that the girl drowned. The police reconstructed the crime scene, and Peter convincingly demonstrated how he had escaped from the car through the rear window. Ursula's family, however, never believed it was an unfortunate accident. Firstly, it was a convertible, and Peter had never lowered the top before. Secondly, Ursula was an excellent swimmer. According to an expert who later analyzed the case, Ursula had time to escape from the car as drowning doesn't occur instantly but takes around 3 minutes as the water fills the vehicle. However, the Belgian police treated it as an unfortunate accident caused by the negligence of the driver. The young widower was sentenced to 3 months in prison, and the case was closed. 2 cases, 2 crime scenes, and 2 scenarios between which investigators couldn't help but notice coincidences. In both cases, there was a road accident, the driver lost control, and the car ended up in the water. One of the spouses managed to escape from the car in time, while the body of the other was not found in the car.
Now detectives urgently needed to find Aurora and Peter, as they became the main suspects in the case of Mark Vanber's death. Detectives also suspected Peter of Ursula's murder, but since Peter had served 3 months in connection with that case, it was possible to forget about prosecuting him again for the same crime. Meanwhile, the police learned
why Ursula probably died and why Peter became so wealthy. After his wife's death, he received an insurance payout equivalent to 115,000 euros. This allowed him to leave the army and seduce the beautiful Aurora. Their romance lasted for a year. But in early 1994, for unknown reasons, the young couple separated. It was during this time that the girl registered with a marriage agency. She described the ideal man as wealthy, with his own apartment, not overweight, and pleasant. April 1994 marked the beginning of her relationship with Mark Vanber. 4 months after their meeting in August 1994, the girl insured Mark. Interestingly, Mark was obviously unaware of this because the documents bore not his signature, but Aurora claimed that his hand was injured, and she signed the documents for him. Soon, an unfortunate incident occurred. Aurora sold the house,
received the insurance payout, and disappeared. However,
She didn't stay hidden for long. 2 months after Mark's murder, investigators found her trace in Luxembourg. She opened a bank account to deposit an amount equivalent to 475,000 euros. 2 individuals had access to the account, herself and a certain Peter Schlitt. The 2 reunited and moved to Miami, Florida. For almost 2 years, the lovers lived a life of luxury. Luxurious apartments, cars, and a yacht. Until a major French newspaper published an article calling them diabolical lovers and described the suspicions the police had against them. Aurora and Peter became extremely cautious. They changed their appearance and only made calls from telephone booths. They managed to hide for some time until Peter was arrested in a supermarket parking lot. He had around $50,000 with him and offered it to the police in exchange for his release, but they refused. 2 days later, the police arrested Aurora in the apartment where the lovers were hiding. Peter and Aurora did everything possible to avoid extradition. However, on December 3, 1998, they were returned to Belgium. Aurora immediately refused to give any testimony. Peter, on the other hand, spoke a lot, but little of what he said was true. Since they clearly did not want to cooperate with the investigation, the police did not have solid evidence against them. The course of the case changed due to an anonymous phone call. A woman called and revealed that she had information about Mark's murder. Later, the police identified the woman as Fabienne Lefebvre. Fabienne was Aurora's stepmother, but she had recently separated from the girl's father and decided to either seek revenge or clear her conscience. Fabienne claimed that after the tragedy in Corsica, she rushed to the hospital to comfort her stepdaughter. However, she was met by a completely different girl, not grieving at all. According to Fabienne, Aurora confessed everything to her. She stated that Peter was behind it all and that he took care of everything. When Aurora and Mark were driving on the road, Peter and 3 accomplices, his friends from Germany, stopped the car. They beat Mark with baseball bats. According to Fabienne, Mark never knew until the end who betrayed him because he begged the men to spare his wife and let her go. When the beating was over, they put Mark's body in the car and pushed it off a cliff. However, the police failed to find the accomplices or prove their existence because it didn't match Peter's character. Additionally, there were many doubts about the truthfulness of Fabienne's words. Firstly, Fabienne and Aurora had a strained relationship, and secondly, why didn't she go to the police earlier and why did she make an anonymous call? The woman claimed that she was afraid. However, the police were convinced that building a solid case based solely on Fabienne's words was not possible and sought other evidence. In Germany, the police found postcards from Corsica and photographs of the crashed car that went off the cliff in the possession of one of Peter's brothers. They were souvenir snapshots, but the intriguing part was that they were taken 6 months before Mark's murder. Was it a coincidence or careful preparation? Despite the fact that 4 years had passed since the murder, the details of the crime remained a mystery. On June 16, 1999, the police decided to reconstruct the crime scene at the airport. The driver was driving the car at a speed not exceeding 35 kilometers per hour. Aurora was supposed to open the car door wide, as if trying to jump out. She failed to do so, even when the car significantly reduced its speed. She became angry, cried, and had hysterical outbursts, trying to find an explanation for her failure. Peter intervened, attempting to defend Aurora. It is unclear why he was participating in the reconstruction at all since, theoretically, he was not present during the crime in Corsica. After this experiment, the investigators were convinced that Mark Van Ber did not die as a result of an accident but was murdered. The trial began. The defendant's lawyers proposed a new version of events. Allegedly, Mark suffered a heart attack just before falling from a height. In other words, he died a few seconds before the accident, and therefore all the injuries he sustained afterwards became post-mortem. This was a hypothesis that could undermine the entire theory of prosecution. Even the forensic expert considered it a clever move, but such a version did not correspond to the autopsy results. Furthermore, during the trial, the forensic expert revealed another extremely important detail. Mark hadn't eaten anything for several hours before the crime. He was hungry. The fact that Aurora even lied about the romantic dinner with her husband that evening was the final straw for the jurors. They found both of them guilty. Aurora was sentenced to 15 years and Peter to 20 years. It is unlikely that they served even half of their sentences. They were released long ago. Despite Peter being deported to Germany and Aurora being prohibited from leaving the country, as of 2021, they were still together. Peter found work as a carpenter, and thanks to her fluency in several languages, Aurora works. The most remarkable thing about this case is that Aurora and Peter committed two almost perfect murders. And the second crime would undoubtedly have gone unnoticed if Aurora had been a little more patient and hadn't slammed the door in front of her husband's family. If she had remained the same pleasant girl they knew, she would have calmly left after a few months, and the Van B family would never have suspected her of anything. Christy Maro woke up from a sudden phone call. The girl was sleeping in her room. It was 10 a.m. on Tuesday, September 6, 2011, and the 18-year-old student from the University of Technology in Auckland, New Zealand, didn't need to get up early. The phone stopped ringing before Christy picked up the receiver. But then, a few seconds later, it rang again. The girl answered. A male voice on the other end of the line asked to speak to Christy. "This is Christy," the girl said. It turned out that the caller was her acquaintance, Akshay-chan. Until recently, they both worked at a local supermarket. They weren't friends, but they sometimes talked at work and outside of it, exchanging messages on Facebook. They lived just a few blocks apart, and Akshay had come to Christy's house a few times. He often needed someone to talk to about his personal problems. Kind and compassionate, Christy was always ready to listen to him. The girl knew that Akshay had been going through a tough time lately, but she couldn't imagine what he would say next. Her heart sank when he uttered, "I dissolved 40 tablets in a drink, and if you don't come to my house within 10 minutes, I will drink it." Without a second thought, the girl hurried to help Akshay. Christy was in such a rush after Akshay's call that she had hardly any time to get dressed. She quickly put on sweatpants and a sweater over her sleepwear, grabbed her keys and mobile phone, jumped into her car, and drove about a kilometer to Akshay's house. It was unusual for Christy to ignore a cry for help. She always tried to assist those who had a harder time in life. Unlike the sociable Christy, Akshay-chan didn't have many friends. Everyone recognized his extraordinary intellect, but he found it difficult to communicate with other kids, especially girls. When fate brought them together at work in a local supermarket, Akshay began sharing his inner struggles with her. The girl sympathized with him, but in June 2011, she started a new job and saw Akshay much less frequently. By the time he called her on September 6th, a considerable amount of time had passed since their last meeting. Christy had only 2 minutes to arrive at the apartment building where the guy lived with his mother and younger sister. She parked her car, rushed up the stairs, and knocked on the door. Akshay let her inside. Christy followed him through the entrance door, which he locked behind them. There was no one else at home. Akshay's mother was at work, and his 16-year-old sister was at school. As Christy sat down in a chair opposite him, she noticed a small amount of white powder on the table. It looked like someone had crushed tablets. Obviously, Chand hadn't lied when he mentioned the glass with the medication. Christy asked him where the drink was. Do you think I'm that stupid? He replied. Of course, I hid it because I knew you would find it. Concerned, the girl tried to persuade Akshay to seek professional help. Her words disappointed him. From his perspective, Christy wasn't helping him cope with depression after she left the supermarket. Christy explained that she was torn between her university studies and her new job. But Chand argued that she could spare 5 minutes to chat with him on Facebook, and that would be enough. Then he added, "Let's face it, you weren't that busy." Christy became increasingly uneasy. The more he blamed her, the more she explained that she couldn't help him. He needed to reach out to a specialist. This angered Akshay even more. He jumped out of his chair and reached into his pocket for a kitchen knife. The knife was long and very sharp. Akshay held onto the handle tightly, brandishing it in front of Christy. "This is how we're going to do it," he said. "If you scream, I'll stab you with the knife." Christy began whimpering in response, prompting Chand to order her to be quiet and calm down. The girl still held onto her mobile phone, contemplating how to send a message to her friend asking for help. But Chand noticed the phone and demanded that she hand it over. Christy clung to her phone tightly, as if it were her only connection to the outside world. Failing to forcefully take the phone from her, Chand threatened the girl again, implying he would resort to using the weapon. He snatched the girl's mobile phone, and suddenly, Chand began to talk. He declared that he had big plans for the day. He decided to scare the girl, seek revenge on her for not supporting him during his most difficult period, and finally put an end to everything in one fell swoop. Then he demanded that Christy take off her sweater and hand it over to him. After searching through it, he demanded her blue top. The girl refused, but predictably, the guy threatened her with the knife. Christy complied. Then he ordered her to stand up and show that she wasn't hiding anything in her pants. She emptied her pockets, but it wasn't enough for him, and he wanted her to remove the sweatpants she was wearing. Christy refused and broke down in even greater tears. But realizing that she had no choice, she undressed, leaving herself only in her underwear. Chand crumpled her clothes into a pile, sat back in the chair, and began rambling about various things. He spouted nonsense about how people like Christy make others suffer. He accused her of coming to him only when it was already too late. Overall, more time had passed since Christy arrived at his place. Terrified, she asked if he planned to kill her. Chand reminded her of his plans for the day, to frighten her, seek revenge, and drink the prepared drink. He hadn't previously specified how he planned to seek revenge, but now he was ready to tell her. Akshay Chand wanted to violate Christy. Upon hearing this, the girl burst into tears, which prompted Chand to ask her to calm down. Then, out of the blue, he changed his mind. He returned Christy's clothes, phone, and told her she could leave. Still overwhelmed with fear, Christy initially didn't believe the sudden change in the guy's mood. What if he planned to stab her in the back, catching her off guard when she turned away? She shared her concerns with Chand, forcing him to lower the knife. "I'm letting you go, but you should know that as soon as you leave, I will drink the concoction," he said. Christy once again tried to persuade him to abandon this plan. Despite what he had put her through, her character didn't allow her to leave after such words. But Chand insisted. Too frightened to linger any longer, Christy turned around and ran out of the apartment. She hurried down the stairs to her car. Passers-by walked by, unaware of what had just happened to her. Christy wanted to ask one of them for help, but she realized she wouldn't feel safe until she reached home. Getting into her car, Christy locked the doors, started the engine, and drove home. From the perspective of Christy's parents, Brian and Tracy Maro, she was their little miracle. After the birth of their first child, a girl named Heather, Tracy and Brian Maro had been trying to become parents again. However, it took 6 years before Christy was born. By 2011, the very close-knit family members were living far apart. Heather had moved out of the family home a few years ago, and Brian was working in Australia. Tracy was planning to move to Australia soon to be closer to her husband. Christy was also looking forward to the move. As her first year at the University of Auckland's School of Hospitality and Tourism approached its end, where she was studying event management, she could continue her education in Australia. By the age of 30, the young woman dreamed of starting her own event planning company. Currently, she still lived in her parents' home, where she grew up in the suburb of Hillcrest. On the morning of the attack on Christy, Tracy was at work when her phone rang around 11:30 a.m. It was her mother, Shirley, who lived together with Tracy and Christy in the same house. Tracy answered, and in the background, she heard Christy's hysterical crying. Then she heard her mother's voice, telling her to come home immediately because Christy had been attacked. Tracy arrived home within 15 minutes. Upon seeing her mother, Christy threw herself into her arms and didn't want to let go. Trembling and crying incessantly, she recounted what Akshay Chand had done to her. Tracy hardly knew Akshay, but she remembered that once, while seeing off Brian at the airport, they returned home with their daughter and found him waiting at the doorstep. Akshay and Christy chatted briefly. Christy assured her mother that she just needed someone to talk to, but Tracy didn't like him right away. He evoked a strange feeling in her, and she asked her daughter to stop communicating with him. However, the girl was confident that there was nothing to worry about, and Tracy had never heard of Akshay again until this incident. Shocked by the details of what had happened, Tracy immediately took her daughter to the police station. In the police station, Christy repeated her account of the attack. She didn't know why Akshay had a change of heart and let her go, but she was certain that it wasn't the end and that he would attack her again because he had been stalking her for some time. She didn't tell her parents that she had found him sitting on the steps of her house on more than one occasion. At one point, he left a note for her in the mailbox, confessing his love and thanking her for the support she had provided, which he desperately needed. Chand also insisted that Christy accept a large sum of money as a gift. She took the money but didn't spend it, believing that he would demand it back. And indeed, a few days later, he did. When she left work at the supermarket, Chand quit his job on the same day, stating that he had no reason to stay there without her. After that, their communication ceased, and it became evident that Akshay had built up a lot of anger towards Christy, believing that she had abandoned him. The thought of him being out there frightened her, and the police recognized the danger she faced. As a result, Akshay Chand was promptly placed under arrest. Akshay admitted to everything and stated that the drink he threatened to consume contained multivitamins. However, he genuinely believed that consuming them in large quantities was toxic. In the police station, he calmly explained that his motive was revenge. Chand was angry at Christy because she didn't help him with his depression, and he openly expressed that he still harbored thoughts of vengeance. The police were extremely concerned about his behavior. It was a significant leap from someone who had never had any issues with the law to a criminal charged with abduction, attempted sexual assault, and threats of harm. Since he was still angry at Christy, the detectives knew it was crucial to keep Chand in custody until he could appear in court. They prepared a document outlining the reasons why Chand should not be released on bail, emphasizing Christy's fear and the proximity of their homes. They highlighted the fact that he could appear at her doorstep within minutes if he desired. 3 days after the attack, Akshay appeared in court. His lawyer argued that her client should be released on bail because he was only 18 years old. According to the law at that time, individuals over 17 but under 20 years old were typically eligible for bail if they had no prior convictions. Since Chand had never been arrested before, his lawyer claimed that he should be granted bail. She promised that he would take antidepressant medication, and if released on bail,
His family would supervise him. However, the judge believed that it was not appropriate to release a person who had shown unwavering determination to carry out his actions. Despite the law, the judge stated that the only circumstance in which she would consider granting bail was if Chand agreed to be admitted to a psychiatric hospital. However, this option was unlikely. Therefore, the judge decided to defer the bail decision and requested a psychiatric evaluation for Akshay. Throughout this time, Christy continued to suffer. Her father was scheduled to return from Australia in a week, and she convinced her family not to inform him about what had happened so that he could continue working without worry. Initially, she was afraid not only to travel in public transportation but even to sleep in her own room. Whenever she heard any sound at night, she immediately asked her family to check what it was. Her greatest fear was that Akshay would be released and would attack her family or fixate on another innocent girl. By early November, life began to slowly improve. Chand was scheduled to appear in court on Wednesday, November 9th, and in 2 months, Christy and her family would be living in Australia. The relocation, which was initially meant to mark the beginning of an exciting new chapter in their lives, now became an urgent necessity. On the morning of November 7th, Tracy got up at 6:30 and began preparing for her workday. She let the dogs out, made breakfast, and took a shower. As she was getting dressed, she heard a knock on the door. It was still early, around 7 a.m., but Tracy wasn't surprised by the knock. Christy loved shopping online, and her orders were usually delivered in the morning. While Christy was still asleep, getting some rest before her late shift at work, Tracy went to answer the door herself. There was a young man standing on the porch. Tracy didn't recognize him immediately, but then she realized it was Akshay Chanda. He was holding a knife. Tracy felt fear grip her as Chanda forced his way into her home. She screamed as loudly as she could, hoping that Christy would hear and understand that something terrible was happening and have time to escape. Or maybe the neighbors would hear and come to their aid. Still threatening Tracy with the knife, Chanda asked who else was in the house. Tracy lied and said her husband was home. That was not true. He had already returned to Australia. He had wanted to leave work, but the police convinced him that his family would be safe. But somehow Chanda seemed to know this, which made Tracy suspect he had been watching them for some time. Suddenly, Christy appeared on the stairs near Tracy and Chanda. Barefoot and in her sleepwear, she was awakened by her mother's scream and went upstairs to find out what was happening. When she saw Chanda, Christy screamed. Frozen with fear, she stood at the top of the stairs, unable to move. Chanda continued to direct the knife at Tracy, slowly advancing toward Christy. Then he kicked her in the chest, causing her to tumble down the stairs. Christy got up, ran down the steps, but slipped in her haste and fell again. She then got up and ran through her grandmother's room and into the backyard. Chanda chased after her. Meanwhile, Tracy called the police. Given what Chanda had done previously, she thought he might be trying to scare Christy again. She was confident that Christy would be able to lock herself in her grandmother's room, and Chanda wouldn't be able to reach her. The police were aware of the situation. They would be there within a few minutes and arrest Chanda. Tracy dialed emergency services. But before she could provide her address, she heard a frantic scream. It was Christy. Tracy dropped the phone and ran downstairs. Christy lay on the porch in the backyard, with a pool of blood spreading beneath her. Chanda stood nearby. Tracy rushed to her daughter and embraced her. She couldn't see any wounds, but Christy couldn't move. It seemed difficult for her to breathe. Tracy repeatedly told her daughter that she loved her and begged her to hold on because help was on the way. It seemed to Tracy that Christy was trying to say something to her. Looking into her eyes, Tracy saw that life had just left them. Christy was gone. Chanda just stood there. When Tracy looked at him, she saw that he still held the knife. The blade was bent at a 90-degree angle. Chanda himself was covered in blood. Showing no concern about what might happen to her next, Tracy screamed that he had killed Christy. With a completely emotionless voice, he replied, "I'm glad." The police arrived less than 10 minutes after the attack began. Chanda was still in the backyard, listening to music on an iPad. The broken knife lay on the ground. An officer asked what he was doing there. Chanda replied, "Retribution." Another officer noticed that Chanda's hands were trembling and asked why. He responded, "It's not easy to kill someone, is it?" Chanda was arrested and taken to the police station. Tracy had the difficult task of informing Heather and Brian about what had just happened to Christy. The Maro family had been convinced that something like this would happen ever since Chanda was released on bail a month earlier. Initially, the judge denied his release, citing the need for further information about the case and the defendant's health condition. However, since he qualified for bail under the law, his lawyer quickly filed 2 applications for release. Chanda wrote a letter to the new judge, David McNaughton, expressing remorse for the attack on Christy. He stated that he deeply regretted what he had put the girl through and, given the opportunity, he would apologize to her and her family. Christy also wrote a letter to the judge, pleading not to release Akshay. She believed that since he had nothing to lose, he would attempt to attack her again. On October 5th, the judge granted Chanda bail, despite reading Christy's letter and being aware that the police also believed it was right to keep him behind bars. Chanda was allowed to return to his home, which was located just 350 meters away from Christy's house, in a straight line. The police were extremely disappointed but assured the Maro family that they would protect them. Officers promised to check on Chanda at various times of the day, making sure he was at home. All the officers patrolling the area were informed about the case. Overall, the police visited Chanda 23 times in the 32 days he was free, and each time he was at home. Despite the police assurances, Christy's fears grew. And after 32 days, he showed up at her doorstep with a knife. Forensic experts investigating the scene of her death found the knife Chanda used to stab her 10 to 15 times before it bent 90 degrees and became useless. He attacked her from behind, delivering a powerful blow to the back of her head. She fell to the floor, where Chanda continued to strike her on the back. One wound was so severe that Christy almost felt nothing afterwards. In the police station, Chanda was surprisingly calm and immediately confessed to everything. Despite suddenly releasing Christy on one occasion, he had never let go of his desire for revenge, and in prison, he started plotting her murder. Knowing that he needed to escape from prison to carry out his plan, he feigned remorse by writing a sympathetic letter to the judge. While free, he didn't waste any time and waited, knowing that Christy and her family would be protected by the police. Although the judge believed that Chanda's family would keep an eye on him throughout the day, his mother worked long hours, and his sister was too young for such a role. She was scared of him herself. All his mother could do was keep kitchen knives away from him, but Chanda knew what she had in mind and hid one of them. On November 7th, he woke up at 6:30, knowing that the day had come. In 2 days, he was scheduled to appear in court, and Christy probably believed that she was safe. The investigators were confident that Akshay would be found guilty on all charges, since he had confessed to everything. However, they were surprised when he decided to plead not guilty by reason of insanity. Several experts, including one hired by his defense and 2 from the prosecution, evaluated him. Akshay told them that he had been hearing a persistent female voice for some time, especially in the mornings. He claimed that the voice ordered him to kill Christy and wished for her mother's death. Although initially Akshay could resist the voice's influence, he eventually succumbed to it. After consultations with psychiatrists and starting medication, He didn't express remorse for the murder but acknowledged that he would have to live with the knowledge of what he had done. It was incredibly difficult for Christy's parents to come to terms with the medical assessment. Tracy, in particular, struggled. She regretted opening the door to the killer and couldn't forget the last moments of Christy's life. "All I see, all I will ever see, is my daughter lying on my lap, gasping for air, covered in blood, dying for some senseless reason. He just stood there and watched. He didn't even attempt to escape. What kind of person does that?" She demanded punishment for Akshay, but the psychiatrist explained to her that Akshay's symptoms, previously attributed to depression, could now be explained by schizophrenia. Moreover, when depression is treated with medication, symptoms of schizophrenia can become more pronounced. During the first attack, the illness was in its early stage, and he managed to understand that harming the girl would be wrong, so he let her go. However, during the second incident, when he came for her, he was aware of what he was doing, but his illness prevented him from understanding that it was morally unacceptable. Akshay couldn't be tried for murder, but he was found guilty of kidnapping and attempted sexual assault. However, he would still serve his punishment in a psychiatric facility. He would only be released if he ceased to pose a danger to society, but his chances of recovery were extremely slim. The Marceau family relocated to Adelaide, Australia, but they didn't allow Christy's murder to become just another crime statistic. If Akshay had not been released on bail after the first crime, Christy would have moved to Australia and lived happily. Therefore, they started a campaign to change the bail laws. Thanks in part to their efforts, since 2013, defendants are required to prove that they are not a threat to society, instead of the police having to prove the opposite as it was before.